All right, good morning. We are going to go ahead and get started. It is June 6, 2025, and this is the USBE Law and Licensing Committee. I am Amanda Bollinger, Vice Chair of Law and Licensing, and filling in for Chair Carey, although I believe Chair Carey should be online. Is that correct? Okay, so we have Chair Carey online, and as we take a roll call, we'll just go ahead. And actually what we're going to do is I'm going to let you each say your name and which area you represent. And we'll do that and count that as our attendance as well. Okay, so Member Hall.
My name is Rod Hall. I represent District 3, which is a portion of Davis County into Weber County. That would include a lot of cities.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm Carol Lear, and I represent District 6, which is the eastern part of Salt Lake City, actually most of Salt Lake City, and out into Mill Creek and Holiday, and also Park City.
Okay, and Chair Carey online.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I represent Ogden School District and almost all of Weber School District, a small portion that I overlap with Member Hall's district.
Okay, thank you. And I'm Vice Chair Bollinger. I am representing District 9, which is the southwest corner of the valley, Jordan District, Canyons, a little bit of Granite, and a little bit of Murray. So thank you all for being here this morning. And from my understanding, we have no public comment. Is that still correct? Okay, thank you, Vanessa. All right, so we will go ahead and move to item 1.2, the Registered Apprenticeship Program for Teachers Amendment. And Director Rasmussen, did you want to introduce this?
Yeah, if I can, thank you. Ben Rasmussen, Director of Law and Professional Practices. It's good to be with you this morning. We are proposing a few amendments to R277-333. These come as a result of updates to our agreement with the Department of Labor for the apprenticeship program. A couple of significant changes that you'll see in there are that these amendments create a category for pre-apprentices, which doesn't require a college degree for applicants to participate in the program. It also changes the name of mentors to journey workers. So those are the two biggest substantive changes you'll see in there. You'll also see some other changes throughout there. Happy to answer any questions that you have. We have Dr. Malia Height online and also Christina Guevara in the audience who can answer any questions you have about the program.
Okay, before we move to questions, Dr. Height, did you want to add any additional information?
No, I think Director Rasmussen summed it up perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we will open it up to the group for questions.
I have a. No, do we need mics or not? Yes, we do.
Yeah, you got to.
Well,
actually, do we have to have a motion before you speak?
Oh, I'll make a motion. Or go ahead, Rod.
I'd like to make a motion that the committee approve R277-333 Registered Apprenticeship Program for Teachers, Draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Okay, so we have a motion that the committee approve R277-333 Registered Apprenticeship Program for Teachers, Draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. So now let's open that up to questions.
So I have a few questions, if that's okay, and they can be directed to Dr. Height or Mr. Rasmussen, either one. I'm curious. I mean, this is really new language for me and sort of a new, not a totally new concept, but it's kind of in the spirit of everybody's going to do an OJT, on the job training now degree or a position. So that part it's familiar, but the language is kind of unfamiliar. And sometimes the pre-information is a little uncertain for me. I'm looking at line 61 to begin with, and it talks about the journey worker, paraeducator, and I guess a journey worker and paraeducator are always used together. Is that right, Malia?
If I may, Chair.
Yes.
Thank you. Malia Height, I'm the Executive Coordinator of Educator Licensing. So in this rule, you will see a new word, journey worker, and that is a specific term that is defined and associated with registered apprenticeships. And within the rule, we have two types of journey workers. We have a journey worker for a pre-apprentice and a journey worker for teachers. And so you'll see two new defined terms, journey worker teacher and journey worker paraeducator. And those are to define with the two parts of our registered apprenticeship. The first 2 years of the apprenticeship are the pre-apprenticeship, where someone is working as a paraeducator in a school, learning how to be a highly qualified and trained paraeducator. And then the second 2 years, when they're completing degree requirements and learning how to be a teacher in their on-the-job training, then they are overseen by a journey worker teacher.
Thank you, Dr. Height. And if I may, I'm going to add to this conversation. I will tell you that in the field, the word that was used before was just mentor, and that can get really confusing with what the word mentor means in law for new teachers or provisional teachers. And so I really appreciate this change, although journey worker is an interesting word, right? But however, it's nice to delineate because it's going to help clarify the role as in practice. So I would just like to add that. So back to you, Member Lear.
And that is a helpful explanation. Thank you. So then it makes, maybe I'll still ask the question, but now I'm a little clearer. So the journey worker paraeducator, it means an experienced educator, paraeducator, although it sounds like a inexperienced paraeducator. And it talks about may evaluate a pre-apprentice's competencies. For what purpose? Is that to not, it sounds like that's the beginning of the process, or is that in the middle of the process? What is the purpose?
Dr. Height?
Thank you. So yes, you're correct. A journey worker paraeducator is somebody who has worked as a paraeducator for a number of years and has demonstrated the board's standards for instructional paraeducators. So that means they're trained, they know how to do the job very well. Within a registered apprenticeship program, journey workers are required to evaluate their apprentices while they're completing their on-the-job learning, their training. And so they do evaluate those apprentices multiple times throughout the year to show their demonstration of growth and competency.
Helpful. And follow up quickly.
Yes.
And so is there a rubric for that? How does that happen?
Dr.
Yes.
Height?
Thank you. So we do have a rubric that has been designed. It is in collaboration with other teams here in the agency that will evaluate the paraeducator against those standards, the board approved paraeducator standards.
Thanks. And then different question. Is that okay?
Go ahead.
Dr. Height again. I wasn't, and it was late at night when I was reading this, admittedly, but I was sort of confused by this phrase on line 243, where it says, it's talking about this wrapped agreement, and then it says an employer partner may adapt its agreement to fit local context. Help me with what you're meaning.
Sure.
Dr. Height?
So the RAPT is the Registered Apprenticeship Program for teachers, and they may adjust it. For example, we have within the board rule and our agreement with Department of Labor that a pre-apprentice has to make a minimum of $7.75 an hour, and that's the baseline. But perhaps in one district, their entry-level paraeducator starts at $12 an hour. And so they could adjust something like that would still meet the minimum requirements, but that their agreement with their apprentices would be that they start at $12 an hour and then go to 13 and then 15.
And then one follow-up that prompts.
Yeah, go ahead.
And so does it only apply to salary? It doesn't seem to. Would it also apply to
No.
hours worked or other
Yeah.
stuff?
So it could apply to the number of hours worked. It could apply to how many different situations they're working in. Are they working solely in one type of classroom? Are they working in a variety of classrooms? Are they working in special education? Are they working in, so they can adjust the employment agreement to make sense for whatever it is the district needs. They could say, we're only going to use apprenticeship to create special education teachers, or we only need CTE teachers. And so they can adjust their agreement with their employees to determine what's best for their local LEA.
And I just have one more quick question, sorry, that I didn't think I had.
Go ahead, Member Lear.
This could apply similarly to charter schools as well as school districts, is that right?
Dr. Height?
Yes, yes, Chair.
Okay.
We absolutely do have actually more of our charters are joining, and we have lots of charters that already have established agreements with the Department of Labor for a registered apprenticeship for teachers.
Great, thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Height. Right. Chair Carey, did you have any questions?
No, thank you.
Okay, all right. No further comments or questions?
You go ahead.
Yeah, we already have the motion, so I will
Oh,
go
we
ahead and
have the
repeat the
motion.
vote.
I'm sorry.
Yes, I'll repeat the motion and then we'll
Yeah.
go ahead and take a
Thank
vote.
you.
So the motion is that the committee approve R277-333 Registered Apprenticeship Program for Teachers, Draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. All right, let's go ahead and take a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Chair Carey?
Aye.
Okay, that is unanimous. Thank you. We'll go ahead and move to item 1.3, which is data sharing agreement with Marika Timmer, USBE 250073RA. And I'll invite Director Chalice up to go ahead and introduce this agreement.
Right back.
Good morning, committee. Katie Chalice, Director of Privacy. I just realized my cell phone is in my purse. I just want to make sure that it's not going to ring in the middle of this. Okay, settled. All right. This data sharing agreement is what we call a research data sharing agreement with Marika Timmer, who is here, by the way, back here behind me, not Ben, but yes. And she's happy to answer any questions about the nature of her proposed study if the committee has any. I'll just kind of queue up the agreement. So Marika is going to be investigating sort of the types of sort of higher level coursework that English learners take in their high school experience. And she's identified a few cohorts, so students who are seniors who were seniors during 2022, 2023, and 2024. And I think I kind of explained the general. Anyway, does the committee have any questions for me? I'm happy to answer any questions. And then Marika has come to the desk as well.
Okay, and actually, I will go ahead and direct a question to Marika. Thank you for being here. Can you help us understand who might have access to this student level data throughout your study? And you can just go ahead and press the little button that has the little hand wave person.
I hope everyone can hear me well.
And go ahead and introduce yourself by name.
Hi, my name is Marika Timmer. I'm a PhD student at the University of Utah. I'm in the Education Leadership and Policy program. I'm requesting this data for my dissertation. I will be the primary researcher on this data agreement, and I will be the one having access to this data.
Okay, thank you. And a follow-up, do you have other advisors as well, professors that are working with you that will also have access to that data?
I will be the only.
You can just leave it on.
Oh, look at that. Yep, thank you. I will be the only researcher on this agreement. I will have a dissertation chair and an advisor working at the Utah Education Policy Center who will not have access to this data, but who would be able to advise me in this process in terms of data privacy and in terms of just the overall process of analysis.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and open it up.
Sure. Is that okay?
Yep.
Marika, when you're finished with this data, what will you do with it? What will happen to it?
The data will be destroyed after the agreement ends, and it will be used for my dissertation. That's
Okay.
what it will be used for.
Okay, Member Lear.
Question. So sounds pretty self-serving, but usually we'll ask you, we're sharing our data, not our data, the data that's been gathered about Utah students. So we usually look for a way that your research could benefit the public education system, the community, students generally. Can you speak to that a little bit? And I'm I think I read that it's in there. I was looking for it last night, but I think I read that you will share your dissertation, your findings with the board when you're finished. But please explain a little bit about, especially for the audience that's listening that worries about data privacy, how you will share that.
Yes, thank you so much for that question. I'm requesting de-identified student level data. The results of my dissertation will be shared within a year to the USPE, whatever outcomes I have, whatever reports I will be able to share. I am researching course taking patterns specifically for English language learners in the Utah state. What I read in some of the reports that the USPE is focusing on is, for example, something that I read in the Title III English Language Acquisition and Enhancement, a 4-year monitoring, and I cite, a 4-year monitoring plan for excited students now includes annual conferences with families and school teams to ensure increased access to challenging academic courses for post-secondary and career success. We want to make sure that these students succeed in the Utah system, and I'm aspiring to contribute to that.
Thank you.
That's
Did you have any follow-up questions?
I don't. Thank you.
Okay. I would like to say, you kind of mentioned, we do have an increased population of English language learners, or ELs as some might call them. And we do want to make sure that we are having them on a pathway of academic excellence. And so this will be interesting to see if we are making sure that they're reaching their potential. Chair Carey, did you have any questions on this?
Thank you, Vice Chair. I do. Do you have an operational hypothesis, or maybe even just an inclination? Is it directional in the sense that you're looking to demonstrate what? What are you hoping that access to this data, what question are you hoping that it will answer for you?
Thank you for that question. I'm mostly interested if English language learners, in general, what their course taking patterns are in terms of what services they receive and what other courses they are taking as well. I'm interested in their access to higher academic coursework, specifically how it relates to post-secondary education. I am not working with a hypothesis at the moment. I am solely interested right now in the course taking patterns.
Vice Chair, may I follow?
Yes, please.
My second question is, and this came up recently from a research organization. I attended a meeting and they said, really, in order to protect data, you really need to know, once you provide access to it, where is it going to be housed and stored after you give permission and you release it. And the example they gave, they said, if your researcher works for a university or college, don't assume that the data you turn over is going to be housed exclusively on those computers or terminals or laptops. Because if it's housed on an unprotected laptop, your research, it doesn't matter what the safety protocols of the institution are. So one, this would be for Director Chalice. Do our agreements require, once we provide the data, that it be housed in a network that meets certain standards? And then to, and I apologize, Doctor, I didn't catch your full name, but to the individual speaking, where will this data be housed? Will it be housed there exclusively? Is it going to be, will you have access to it or others via their personal equipment? Thank you, Vice Chair.
Okay, thank you, Chair Carey. We'll go ahead and start with Director Chalice.
Thank you. So we do have in our standard terms and conditions, which exist here, particularly in starting in 35, confidentiality, general provisions, and then it goes through 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, and 41. Those are the primary provisions in the agreement that protect data. In an older version, we had very specific language about where the data would be stored, specific about laptops. So it used to say something like, hey, it has to be on a laptop that is disconnected from the network. We've moved away from that, Chair Carey, and have moved more to a general, a requirement that the researcher adopts generally in accepted industry best practices regarding security. So if you are wondering if there's language that specifically states where the data is destroyed or is stored, that does not exist here, but there are provisions that ensure that it's not disclosed beyond the subcontractors. So that's what's in the contract language, but I'm hopeful that Marika can explain how it will happen in practice.
Now, Marika, will you speak to that, please?
Yes, I will comply by anything that is requested by the USB in terms of data storage, and I will consult with my advisors who have experience storing sensitive data, specifically from the Utah State Board of Education. Our most secure storage right now would be Box, which is used by the University of Utah, which is where I will store my data, but I will consult with my advisors.
And we can assume that that's password protected.
Absolutely.
Okay. Go ahead, Director Chow.
Yeah, thank you. I did find some of those more specific provisions are still in the agreement. And I'll just read a couple examples of those. So researchers shall store and maintain all data in data centers located in the United States. Researchers shall permit its employees and subcontractors to access data remotely only via a secured manner, such as a VPN. They shall store all data as well as any backups in an encrypted form. So there are some, and specifically, researchers shall enforce strong password protections on all devices and networks with access to the data. So there are some specific provisions that remain.
Okay, Chair Carey, any follow-up questions or comments?
Just one. Thank you, Director Chalice. So we were provided with information that showed, this is on the School Safety Task Force, that one of the most effective, and it surprised me because it seems so non-tech, but they said one of the most effective ways to protect data was to require a dual sign-in, confirmation sign-in. Does our agreement require that those who get our data have to have that dual login system where, you get a confirmation via email or phone and a code, and then you have to enter it? Does our agreement require that basic tech privacy protection?
Director Chalice?
So multi-factor authentication that you're referring to is not
Thank you,
specifically
Director
called.
Chalice.
Yeah, you bet. That's not specifically called out in the contract. However, there is a provision 40.3 that says that the agency shall comply, or in this case, the researcher shall comply with and protect and maintain data in accordance with industry accepted cybersecurity framework. And all accepted cybersecurity frameworks strongly encourage the adoption of multi-factor authentication. So directly, no. Indirectly, I would argue, yes, it is included in the agreement.
And if I could just have the privilege of asking Tamrika just one more question.
Sure, go ahead.
And that would be, if we required that dual factor authentication in order to provide this information to you, would that be something that you would be amenable to?
Thank you for asking. The Box storage that I'm referring to, that is used by the University of Utah, has dual two-way factor and login authentication. Sorry, yeah.
That's
And I
fantastic. Thank you,
I have
Chair.
one
Okay, thank you, Chair Carey, and we'll go ahead to Member Lear.
I have just one very simple question. And at my understanding, I thought you began this discussion by saying this would be de-identified data anyway. Is that accurate?
Director Chalice?
You're not gonna like my answer.
Oh, I probably would be fine.
And I actually, if it's okay, I am going to take just a couple seconds to fill in the committee on some history here, because you're going to hear this kind of language from me a lot going forward. We have historically at our agency used the term de-identified quite loosely. In truth, the way de-identified data is defined in industry and even under FERPA is that the data cannot be re-identified. That's not the way we've used it historically. The way we've used it is in our agency and our dialogue has been, including me and my team, to be clear, has been, de-identified means that direct identifiers are removed. So no names, no birth dates. And we're like, that's de-identified. The reality is that doesn't, industry definition, that's not really the term. And we're starting to move toward trying to use the more accurate version of that term. So if you asked me 2 years ago, is this de-identified? I'd be like, yeah. And if you ask me now, I will say no. But the identifiers that Marika would have access to are non-traditional identifiers. So it's not student name, it's not local ID, but she would have access to statewide student identifiers, which is an identifiable piece of information.
But my greater concern is sort of the embedded, if I may follow up, I'm sorry, is more the embedded FERPA concern that the reasonable normal person could not identify a student from the pieces of data that the researcher will have. Is that true?
No. So I would argue that this data set would be identifiable under that definition you're talking about, under FERPA, that a member of the school community, as they say, could identify a student based on these data.
But I guess then our protection is that they won't have access to the data.
Exactly.
That reasonable members of I can't remember, there's a modifier of people, but the normal person in the school community wouldn't have access to the data because it's so secure, as we have just heard.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Okay, that satisfies me, and I appreciate that deeper, more complete explanation. Thank you. And I'm so impressed with your English skills. I mean, that sounds silly. You're a doctor, but still your English is very good. Thanks.
Okay, Marika, one follow-up question just for the public to understand. So when we talk about this data and we're saying that it could be identifiable, but that it would be if you have access, like Member Lear said. However, I just want to clarify that in your dissertation, which is the purpose of this data collection, that none of this data would be shared out within your dissertation. Is that true?
Thank you for asking that question. That is correct. I also want to emphasize that I went through FERPA training. I've done data privacy training as well, city training. I'm going to make sure that this data stays private.
Okay, thank you. Any additional questions or comments?
I'd just like to emphasize that University of Utah is a research institution, and it would, with a fabulous reputation, and it would be very careful, I'm sure, in its training and in its expectations for its researchers. So that gives me some additional comfort too. Thank you.
Okay, with that, it looks like we are ready for a motion.
Okay, I would move that the committee approve the data sharing agreement with Marika Timmer and Ford. Do you want me to say all those numbers there?
Yes, please.
Okay. Parent USBE 250073RA and forward to the board for.
Okay, thank you, Member Hall. The motion on for the committee is that the committee approved the data sharing agreement with Marika Timmer, USBE 250073RA, and forward to the board for approval. So let's go ahead and take a vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 Chair Carey? All right, that is unanimous. Thank you. Thank you for your time and good luck. All right, with that, we're going to go ahead and move to item 1.4. data sharing agreement with Utah Department of Health and Human Services, USDE 250078 IAA. And we will turn the time over to Director Chalice to introduce this item.
Thank you, Chair. I'll note first that we have an abundance of DHHS members online. Thank you so much to you guys for being available. And they're happy to answer questions about the nature of how the data will be used and also the impetus behind the request. But I'll do my best to kind of queue it up. So the Department of Health and Human Services, every 5 years, as I remember, conducts what they call a dental screening survey. It's not survey in the sense that it's asking questions. It's a survey in the sense that it's kind of like surveying the field. So they sort of spot check different schools. They obtain parent consent for students to receive a dental screening. And then the students, while at school, go to the cafeteria, their gym or whatever, and there are folks there who conduct a dental screening. They're looking for teeth decay and that kind of thing. And then the goal is to kind of get a feel for how our kids, what is the state of dental health for children in Utah. That's the goal.
Okay, thank you.
All that happened. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. If you have more, please add. Yes.
I have so much more to say. All of that happens without USBE involvement really at all. There is a little bit of, so they select the schools based on some aggregate data from USBE. So that's all been done. Now they're at a phase where their statistician is looking to make sure that the results of that study are presented statistically in a way that it does indicate whether that's representative of the state as a whole, because they did not conduct this screening for all students in the state. I think it was 50 schools, if I remember right. And so the request for data is aggregate data, meaning it's just counts per school. Normally, we wouldn't bring an aggregate data request to the committee. However, this aggregate data does not have what we call disclosure avoidance applied. So there's going to be some low end sizes in the data set. So for example, a student, there might be, one African-American student in a particular school. If that were released publicly, then someone would be able to say, oh, I know who that student is. And so the intention is not to release the data publicly, but we do protect it in the same way that we do personally identifiable information. That's why this request is coming to the committee today. And now I'm finally done.
Thank you, Director Chalice. And it looks like we do have quite a group online. Is Michael Sanderson online?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, and are you open to taking questions?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and open it up to the committee. Any questions?
The only point I wanted to sort of make sure I heard correctly and emphasize for the public hearing about this, I mean, theoretically screening children for cavities or for dental health sounds pretty personal and intrusive. But I heard you say that this is they only do this for children whose parents have given permission. So it's with parent permission. And of course, they made the point in this, I think it was here that I read this, or yes, it was, that oral health is one of the primary indicators of overall health for children. So how would we not want to know that this is a good thing, that this is proceeding as we want it to? So given that there's parent permission and it's such a worthy cause, and the students' names are not revealed, is what I'm saying, is it's pretty de-identified, and it would only be, the results are only going to be released collectively. I feel very comfortable with this. Thanks.
Hey, thank you. And I would like to direct a question to you, Michael, if I may. Just curious to know, why do you need this information or data from USBE specifically? And has this been collected or released in the past? It sounds like this is done every 5 years. So is this something where you've received data in the past, or is this something where you're trying to add to, if you can speak to that.
Yeah, so we need the data just for
And sorry, Michael, I'm going to pause you for a second. Will you just introduce yourself by name and what your
yes, I'm
role
sorry.
is? Thank you.
My name is Michael Sanderson. I work in the Office of Maternal and Child Health, and I'm the program manager for the Data Resources Program. We provide a lot of statistical and analytic assistance to other programs. We've been working with Office of Oral Health or Oral Health Program for many years now, providing them their data support. And this survey is repeated every 5 years. It was not repeated in 2020 because of the pandemic, but previously the last time was in 2015, and we were able to get counts, school level counts of third graders by some demographics like gender, race, ethnicity, broken down like white versus non-white, Hispanic versus non-Hispanic. And that data is used to weight the data. It is a random sample of schools. And so it's because we're not sampling every school in the state, we want to still be able to say something about the state. So this data is used to calculate weights for what we call post-stratification, where we use this data to kind of make it more representative of kids in the state overall. We don't really do much other than that. Once the weights are calculated and we've looked at them and they pass muster, we delete the data and then we provide estimates for different schools. I mean, we're not going to be releasing these people won't be able to look at the school level or even the local health department level. This is really overall, how are kids looking in Utah? What's the caries rate? And then some comparisons between urban versus rural, and the race ethnicities to help us understand if there are differences among students of different races, ethnicities. Does that answer your question?
Yes, just one part of my question. I was wondering, has this been done before in the past? So you said it was done 10 years ago. Can you speak to, have you received this data then previously?
The department did, yes. I wasn't with the department at that time, but this has been an ongoing study for quite some time. I'm not, Stacy or Lauren, you might be able to speak to how long the screening survey has been going, but we have received data from USBE in the past for these purposes.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. I'm Dr. Stacy Swilling, and I am the state dental director. And I know that we have reports going back to at least 2010, actually 2000, I guess. But Lauren and I and Mike, we weren't with DHHS at the time, so I can't speak to how they received the data, but it has been a survey that has been conducted by the Oral Health Program every 5 years until 2020.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Swilling. Any additional questions or comments from the committee?
Vice Chair, I have two questions.
Yes, please. Go ahead.
And I don't know to whom these should be directed, but we talked about parental consent. The parental consent that was provided, did that include language that there was the risk of re-identification, that parents were notified that it could be possible, if not probable, that your child could be identified as being not only part of the study, but as an individual in the study? And then I have one question about AI after that, Vice Chair.
Okay. Director Towles, did you want to
speak to the what was in the parent consent? And I think you'd be the best to answer that question.
Yeah, I can pull up the parent consent. So when we did
Sorry, I'm going to pause you for just a second. Will you please introduce yourself and then you can go ahead.
Yes, sorry. My name is Lauren Neufeld. I am a dental hygienist and I work in the oral health program at the Department of Health and Human Services. So our parent consent When we did the parent consent on our end to screen these children, we did request the child's name and date of birth, and that was just to ensure that we had written consent for the correct children that we were then pulling into the screening area. So we did collect that during the screenings. I can pull up our survey form here. And it did go through both of our legal team and our privacy and security team when we wrote the parent consent.
Vice Chair,
Yes, please, Chair Carey.
just for time, I can work with Director Chalice on that. But my second question is, will AI of any type be used to review, summarize, interpret the data that is being gathered? And if so, is that AI sequestered, meaning under the complete control of the party that's going to be receiving this data and not dumped into a big general pool?
Hey, Michael, is that something you can answer for us?
Yeah, and Stacy or Lauren, jump in if you like, but we're not authorized to use AI for our jobs right now. I don't see a purpose for it in a project like this. So this will all be done by epidemiologists working with me. We'll be using SAS. It's a statistical software program to calculate the weights. And then we'll run the numbers, the prevalence numbers for the oral health program and help them with interpretation. There are no plans, or we're not authorized to use AI for any component of this project.
Okay. Chair Carey, does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Okay. Any other additional comments or questions? Okay, it looks like we are ready for a motion.
I'd like to make the motion that the committee approve the data sharing agreement with Utah Department of Health and Human Services, USBE 25007 8IAA, and forward to the board for approval.
Okay, thank you. The motion is that the committee approve the data sharing agreement with Utah Department of Health and Human Services, USBE 25007 8IAA, and forward to the board for approval. Let's go ahead and take a vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Chair
Aye.
Carey? And that motion is unanimous. Thank you. And thank you for joining us to answer our questions. We
Thank
are
you.
ready to go ahead. Oh, thank you, Director Chalice. We are ready to move to item 1.5, amendment to board bylaw Article 9, and we'll invite Director Rasmussen to speak to that, or are we having somebody else? Oh, it's Debbie Davis. Okay, CAE Davis.
Good morning, everyone. Yes, Chief Audit Executive Debbie Davis, here I am. So this item just quickly is to align board bylaws with the provision in Utah code. It's in the Utah Internal Audit Act that internal audit staff is independent of daily management operations of the State Board of Education. That is currently the practice. That's how it's outlined in the organizational chart. Just there's a provision in the board bylaws that indicates pretty much all staff are under the superintendent. So we just wanted to make sure the bylaws is consistent with Utah code and current practice. So there's just a quick little exception clause there. And then there's a couple of little additional clarifications just for consistent language, but that's it.
Okay, so you're keeping us in line. Okay, perfect. Does anybody from the committee have any questions, comments? Member Lear?
I do. I don't, this could get very complicated, I think, but I just want to clarify something. Maybe that's obvious. So the fact that you supervise, essentially, you supervise these employees means that you'll do their evaluations, you'll use whatever evaluation tool, I'm assuming the same one that's generally used at USBE, that you don't invent your own or find your own, that you still use the common. That's one, just a yes or no, or
CAE Davis.
Yes,
Go
we
ahead.
use the same one, plus my staff are lucky and we do project-based evaluations too. So
That's
both.
great. Okay, and then the brief follow-up to that, since you're the employee of the board, you're one of like 5 or so employees of the board. I'm wrestling with, and I don't know if you can speak to this or you have an opinion, or I'm wrestling with what responsibility the board has for your employees, or if we, and this is a messy sort of a situation, sort of for the superintendent as well. But so I'm looking to see what responsibility you would believe the board has for your employees.
Okay, CAE Davis.
Well, I would probably defer to our HR director specifically, but I would think, and you mentioned the same as would be for the superintendent and her staff. So we should be managing and supervising that. If something went south, then I'm assuming that would be something that could potentially go to an executive session of the board if you needed to be involved. But that's probably at this point the extent of what I could say about that.
And just to follow up, that means that you would hire and fire them, and then the board would just defer. If we had concerns, board members would come to you for those concerns about your employees.
Yes, absolutely. And I do work with HR on hiring and if a termination was necessary.
Thanks.
Chair Carey, did you have any questions?
No.
Okay, I'm going to take. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Then we are ready for a motion. Article 9.
I would make the motion that the committee approve board bylaw Article 9, direct employees of the board, draft 1, and forward to the board for approval.
Okay, thank you, Member Hall. The motion is that the committee approve board bylaws Article 9, direct employees of the board, draft 1, and forward to the board for approval. Let's go ahead and vote. All of those in favor say aye.
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 And Chair Carey?
Aye.
Okay, that passes unanimously. All right, our next item is 1.6 amendments to board bylaws, Article 4. I would like to make a motion potentially to postpone this to a July board meeting. It sounds like, talking to Chair Carey, we are planning on doing a meeting in July just because we have so many things coming in with law and licensing. And one of the other board members that has been a sponsor of this would like to be able to speak to it as well. And we feel like that might be a good option. So would you guys be okay if we go ahead and postpone that?
Sure.
Okay, so do I need to make an official motion for that? Okay. Yes, okay, I will go ahead and make an official motion that we postpone 1.6 amendments to board bylaws, Article 4 to a July committee meeting.
Second, we don't need a second. Never mind.
Okay, we'll just make sure that that gets written up so it's correct. And let's go ahead and open that up to discussion. Does anybody have comments, questions, concerns? Chair Carey?
No.
Member Lear?
My only concern is that I spent a lot of time on this one for this last week, and I wish we could have foreseen this, and maybe we can do that in the future a little better so that we don't, so that committee members don't spend too much time on items that are going to be postponed. That would help me a lot. But other than that, I welcome the additional time and all the people involved to be present. So thanks.
Okay. All right. Then the motion on the board is that the committee postpone item 1.6 to the July committee meeting. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Chair Carey?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. That is unanimous. We will move on to item 1.7, R277-211, Utah Professional Practices Advisory Commission Rules of Procedure, Notification to Educators, Complaints, and Final Disciplinary Actions Amendment. Director Rasmussen.
Will be. Ben Rasmussen, Director of Law and Professional Practices again. This is a result of HB 497 from the legislative session. That specifically had language added in that directed the board to make rules to hopefully improve the caseload for UPAC to the extent we could do that by rule. This is the kind of the process rule for initiating new cases and would probably be the best, it contains our best efforts at speeding certain cases along. The expedited hearing process that's outlined in this rule is what we use to make simpler cases or less serious cases move through the system more quickly. The major change that we've made substantively to this rule, or that we've recommended to make substantively, you'll see on lines 117 through 124. This gives my attorney investigators discretion to prioritize certain cases when it would be of benefit to either the educator or the LEA, so that we can get those cases through the system in a more expeditious manner. But that you've got on your screen there. Beyond that, there are a number of technical changes recommended in the rule just to kind of clean up the language consistent with our current practices. Happy to answer any questions you have about UPAC the case opening process. We'll also talk a little bit about this in our information item later.
Okay, thank you, Director Rasmussen. We'll open it up to the committee for questions, comments.
I have a few questions. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Chair Carey.
Let him. He's.
Thank you. Director Rasmussen, could you just walk us through the current process and then walk us through what the process would look like should the committee and eventually the board adopt these changes?
Which process are you referring to? Just what an
process,
investigation looks like, or?
Well, the process that you're amending, you said now staff will be able to prioritize. So I take it that currently staff can't do that on UPAC. So do you just take these first come, first served? Do you take them in terms of the nature of the offense, the gravity of the offense?
So our primary approach is taking things first come, first served. I would say that these priorities are things that staff informally will do from time to time. As is, we're cementing this in the rule so it's clear that that's an option. But I think our attorneys have exercised that discretion from time to time before now. But our first approach is usually just to take the oldest first, because that's kind of the fairest approach when you're looking at how long these cases tend to stay flagged. If you didn't take that approach, it could let certain cases languish a little bit unfairly. So that would still be the first approach would be just to take things first come, first serve. But if there are appropriate circumstances, this would just show in rule that they can be prioritized.
Chair Carey, do you have a follow-up?
I do, thank you. So Director Rasmussen, what are the foundational items that dictate which cases would be prioritized? Is it, you said one perhaps would be the age of the case. Are there other factors that have been delineated in this rule that would say, look, cases that involve inappropriate touching, sexual conduct, inappropriate language, like what factors are going to be used to prioritize certain cases over others? And have those factors been delineated in the proposed rule? Thank you, Vice Chair.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Chair Carey. So in response to your question, we've attempted to articulate those on lines 117 through 124. In most cases that UPAC has, the educator is out of work. So there's not usually a continuing ongoing threat to the student. If there's a sexual predator that's been in the classroom, we rarely see an LEA that's going to keep that person in the classroom. They've usually terminated the educator and then referred them to us. So, but if there was someone in the classroom that's an ongoing risk, that's one of the factors that we could consider. If an educator is unemployed and there's a financial hardship, we've identified that as something that our investigators could consider. And then we've also identified a couple of other things that we think would be good factors to consider, specifically if it's necessary to help with a witness that's going to be crucial to the case. or if there's an ongoing uncertainty for the LEA or the community involved, that's something we could consider. But I think still, in most cases, the priority is going to be how long the case has been opened.
Vice
Thank
Chairman,
you,
I
Director
have just one more
Rasmussen.
question.
Yes, go ahead, Chair Carey.
So Director Rasmussen, harm to the victim, is that a factor that the board and UPAC are prioritizing, or is it just hardship to the, I'm going to use the word offender, but we're taking the offender's position into account by saying there's financial hardship. Are we doing anything to prioritize these cases based on the harm done to the victim and their right to see resolution, their right to see justice? Thank you, Vice Chair.
The first priority that we've listed is that the educator poses an ongoing risk to students. So if there is any reason that the educator is an ongoing risk to students, that would certainly be our first priority, to handle that case and address any issues that might be posed there. Like I said earlier,
Director, that's to future students, right? That's an ongoing threat. I'm talking about the harm done to the victim. Are we doing anything in your list of priorities that addresses that particular issue? Is that a factor or not?
It's not, there's nothing specifically called out for past harm, no.
So we're taking into consideration that the conduct committed by the offender, that's something we should take into consideration, but the harm done to the actual student, the harm done to the institution, the harm done to public education, that doesn't warrant anything on the priority list. That strikes me as wrong.
I don't think there's a question there. So.
Yeah. So with that, so Chair Carey, are you suggesting that we make an amendment to specifically, I mean, because I think some people could argue maybe that could create an unusual uncertainty for the educators LEA community, and maybe we add or student or victim there. Did you have a recommendation or an amendment you'd like to make?
My recommendation is going to be to send this back and have it done where there is an equitable balance between taking into consideration the rights of the offender and the rights, and not only the rights, but the duty we have to the victim. And Director Rasmussen just said, this proposal does not do that. And that is something that is something that I cannot support. I'm happy to work with Director Rasmussen on new language, but we have underrated and underprotected students who are the victims of these offenders. And we can't, as a committee or a board, say we're going to go out of our way to protect and take into consideration the financial harm done to the offender, but not the student. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair Carey. We're going to go ahead and go to Member Lear.
And to that point, and I had some questions about this section as well that I'll get to, but I think one of the difficulties as I've watched these investigations over the years is that it shouldn't be an investigation to confirm something. It should be an investigation to explore and see what truly a different investigation than the original investigation by the LEA. So to say we take into consideration the harm to the victim, that's something that has yet to be explored. We don't know yet, the investigator, if the investigator is doing her job or his job right, we don't know if the allegation has even caused any harm, or if the alleged bad guy, perpetrator, has even done any harm. So I think that I don't, and we can work on this more. In fact, I would like to work on this more and involve some of the people who've worked in these processes for a long time so that it's not developed in a vacuum. But I think we want to make sure that it's a pure investigation and not a confirmation of what the LEA did. And that is, I think, why it's important to say, and maybe line 119 can be more broadly worded. But I don't think we can assume if this is a good investigation that there has been harm, because we don't even know, and we certainly don't know if the alleged educator has caused that harm. So I really want to make sure we don't make that assumption in this rule. But I also, for maybe different reasons than Member Carey, would like to maybe further explore the concerns I have. And then I'll just ask a few questions that are, if that's okay.
Yeah, let's go ahead and go to Director Rasmussen, and then we'll come back to Member Lear.
Just one other thing on Chair Carey's concern. My Ashley Carter, who's sitting next to me, is one of my attorneys. She astutely pointed out that line 120 kind of goes to Chair Carey's concern in that we can prioritize a case that needs to be expedited to accommodate a crucial witness. If there's a victim in a case, that would be the central witness in the case. And so if there's ongoing concerns to that witness, that would be covered by line 120.
Thank you, Director Rasmussen. Back to Member Lear.
And also let me be, I would say, alleged victim in the case, if we're exploring this completely objectively. I'm concerned with a little bit different. Let me start with 117, even though I've got a question further up. I'm wrestling with this, two points. First of all, the investigator may prioritize an investigation. I think in the past, it really has been more the executive secretary who assigns the investigator or directs the investigator to take another case first, or maybe it's a collaborative effort. Or I sometimes wondered if that information would even go to UPAC for this committee of educators to be involved in that decision. Tell me who's made that decision previously.
The investigator would make that decision in consultation with the executive secretary.
And so I think that again, it sounds like we're going to be discussing this more. I don't need to make an amendment right now, but I think that might be an important amendment to make, because I think you've had a number of investigators for various reasons come and go in your office, and they may not have the depth of background to be able to understand who should make that in there independently without consulting with the executive director. So I'd like that to be a consideration going forward, that it not be solely the investigator, but maybe the executive secretary in collaboration with, or vice versa. So that was one thing. And the other point I was going to make is practically we know and I've watched these for a lot of years, and then even as board members, we've seen cases. And if you look at some of the cases, I've only done this anecdotally, it would be a really interesting piece of data. But it's interesting to see that the teachers who are represented by attorneys seem to have and this is really a generalization, but they seem to have a lesser punishment. I'd love to see the data on that. Well, I don't know that we have that. As I looked at the things you were going to present, that was not one of the items. But that seems to have been the case as I've observed. So I think that would be interesting to see literally numbers of how many individuals are represented by attorneys versus pro se, and what have been the outcomes, which is of course going to be skewed because of some of the nature of the cases. So don't think it's perfect, but I think it would be helpful. So it concerns me that expediting some cases in your discretion is going to put other teachers at disadvantage. And that concerns me. And I'm concerned that the ones that'll be prioritized may not be, and concerns that would be prioritized by generally. And if the board votes to prioritize certain cases over other cases, then that might be a little more legitimate. But I think when the cases drag out so long, and they drag out for a year, it disadvantages educators. And if we now prioritize other cases, I'm concerned that it may last longer than a year. And I just, that makes it impossible, even for a completely exonerated, in some cases, educator to get a job again if he's been out of the classroom, out of the hiring pool for a year. So that concerns me. And it sounds like we're going to go forward. So I'm not looking for.
Okay, so
answer.
it sounds like there might be an appetite for maybe postponing this and working on it a little bit further. Director Rasmussen, I would like to ask, is this a time-sensitive policy, or is it something that you feel like needs to go through if we're going to have a meeting in July? I mean, August is the first time it could go to the full board. Could you speak to that, please?
We brought this proposal because of HB 497. Rulemaking required by legislation needs to be completed by November. So if we wanted to bump this out a month, certainly would be no problem. I would comment that on a lot of this, we can talk about priorities for a lot of this, but I would just emphasize that the one thing that's we really need to make these cases go faster. It's not going to be rule changes. It's going to be money. And I know that that's not necessarily completely in this board's control, but I would emphasize that, we'll certainly be asking the board to prioritize additional funding for attorneys again. And that's primarily what we need if we're going to make these cases go faster.
Yeah, if it takes, make them go less than a year. That makes sense. Thank you.
One more comment, and
go
I
ahead,
won't,
Member
I
Laird.
won't, I won't opine again, I promise. I had one more question, just specific to the changes here on line 183. No, maybe it wasn't the one on 183. Well, yes, I'll ask the one about 183. The allegations, it says the allegations, if true, implicate the presumption for a letter of education, and that's taken away entirely, and it's now a letter of warning. Is there a reason that you're doing away? It seems like you're doing away with the letter of education. Is that accurate in my misreading?
So there are no presumptions for a letter of education. A letter of education is issued when an educator has not violated the standard, but the board or UPAC feels that they've come close and could use some advice in that regard. But there are no specific presumptions that say a letter of education should be issued. Anytime that an educator has actually violated the standards, the minimum presumption would be a letter of warning.
Okay. And then my last comment is to Director Rasmussen, last concern about numbers of investigators and the cost of that. As we discuss this further, I'll be looking for a discussion about how your cases are investigated. I worry that the investigators, and this is not to disparage, but I feel like there should be more training for the investigators. And I also am not convinced until I actually hear a little bit more from the investigators about how an investigation proceeds, because I want to make sure that we're talking about efficiency as well as talking about the number of people doing these investigations. If a case sits on someone's desk for 6 months and then spends 3 days being investigated, that is not efficient. I'm not saying that happens, but I want to talk with the investigators about how those investigations go forward and make sure that what we're funding is necessary, not we're also exploring efficiency side by side with that. So do you want me to make that motion, Amanda?
Sure, go ahead.
Did I scoop you? Oh. Okay. I would move that the committee send this back for further development by the UPAC staff. And I will add that we involve in this discussion some of the other parties who've been involved with UPAC decision-making over the years. And I'll leave that, who those people might be, to the discretion of the director, so that we can I'm not expecting a full-blown task force, but a few additional individuals so we have a balanced explanation of how these proceed.
Okay, Member Laird, does this motion on the board, does that reflect your intent?
Yes. It's much more simply stated, and thank you.
Okay, we'll let you go ahead and make that
I
motion.
move that the committee postpone discussion of R277-211 and involve other parties in the discussion.
Okay, is there
May
any
I-
discussion?
Yeah,
Yes,
I'm
go ahead.
sorry. May I
Chair Carey.
suggest that it be amended to just note that it will be brought back at the July committee hearing meeting?
Sure.
I just don't want this to be lost in the abyss. Thank you.
Okay.
And now it says that.
Okay, so now the motion is that the committee postpone discussion of R277-211 until the July committee meeting and involve other parties in the discussion. Is that fair?
That
Okay.
reflects my motion.
I would just like to make one comment before before we vote on this, and that is, it's kind of been an interesting shift, and I know that it's been a discussion, it's been on the news, right? Like there's been an increase in referrals, but that's also because of a change in what is required to be reported. So when we change reporting rules and laws, right, that we have to report more things, you're going to see an increase in referrals. And because of that, you also, to Director Rasmussen's point, is to be able to get through those efficiently and effectively, it does require more FTE or more staffing. So with that, do we have any other comments on this or questions? Okay, so we're going to go ahead and vote on that the committee postpone discussion of R277-211 until the July committee meeting and involve other parties in the discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Chair
Yes.
Carey. Okay, that it passes unanimously. Thank you, Director Rasmussen. We will go ahead and move on to item 1.8, R277-613, LEA policies and training regarding bullying, cyberbullying, hazing, retaliation, and abusive conduct amendment. And it looks like we're going to go to Deputy Superintendent Newey.
Well, thank you, Chair. So we have 613 in front of you with some proposed changes that came out of the majority of the changes came out of the legislative session this past session in 2025. There was a bill run that changed the definition of bullying in our code and separated out bullying into both student bullying and staff bullying. And that wasn't something that was in our rule. So we wanted to make sure that our rule and those definitions reflected what was in code. There are also a couple of other changes that we are proposing as staff. One is to include in the policy and training that LEAs provide to all of the applicable parties, so students, teachers, families, information about cyberbullying and kind of the deep fake intimate images. And so we wanted to make sure that that was in there, that there's additional guidance, I believe, and staff can speak to this from federal guidance that speaks to that as well, that we're trying to reflect in our rule. So those are the changes. We also made a few cleanup things just because we went through this rule recently and there was a lot of changes and we caught some things that we just wanted to make clearer and more clean. So those are the changes before you, and we have wonderful staff here to answer your questions.
Okay, we'll go ahead and open it up to the committee for discussion or questions. Chair Carey, did you have any questions or comments? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and ask a question, if I may, Deputy Superintendent. It looks like, I got to find the line. Can you speak to the changes on line 103 to 108, striking that wording on trauma-informed care?
If I may, Chair, I would like to invite staff up to speak to that, if that's appropriate.
Sure. This is Coordinator Chris. Oh, who's going to speak with us? We'll invite whoever up.
Becca Ray, Prevention Specialist. So the lines 103 through 108, that definition was just another cleanup item. Trauma-informed care was removed the last time we brought forth this rule for amendment. And so the definition was just left in, and since it's not used in the rest of the rule, it was removed.
Okay, thank you, Becca. Did you have any Any other questions or
I-
comments?
I do,
Member
sorry.
there?
Sorry to come late to the party a little bit. On lines, 147 through 148. And this has always been sort of a challenge with this rule. I'm trying to understand if this is about bullying, only student bullying, or if it's about also employees being bullied, either by students or by other employees. What's the intent of this rule? And then there's a couple some lines that seem to sort of confuse me. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Becca.
Yeah, thank you. Let's see, line 147 and 148. The intent of the rule is just to prohibit bullying altogether. It should prohibit bullying from staff against students, student on student. Altogether, it prevents hazing, abusive conduct, all of those items. And so specifically with 147 and 148, that should include any staff sharing images, recording, things like that.
So to
Go ahead,
follow up,
member there.
so you're saying that this would apply, and if we go back to the beginning, it says LEA has responsibility to update their policy and develop and update and implement policies, a prohibition on what's on line 147 and 148, and that would apply to students and staff, which would include teachers, employees, anybody sharing a recording of an incident. So it's kind of like, between students sexting. Is that the sort of the implication of 148?
Specifically with 148, that came from legislation last year, and that was aimed to decrease the amount of cyberbullying we were seeing where students were recording incidents of bullying student on student. And so that was the resolution for that.
Okay. So they'd both be prohibited. I mean, both teachers and employees. And then, okay, then I just had one other question than that.
Yes,
if
please,
that's
member
okay,
there. Go ahead.
Line 183. And I kind of am forgetting. You know what? Never mind on that because I can't remember. Oh, no, I'm sorry. That's a different rule. Hang on. And just give me 1 second to look over these notes because I'm blending two rules. Line 169. An LEA shall provide a school designee to provide parental notification. Is that something that was required in this new law? Or is that right? Because it seems like in a very small school or school district, that would be the principal, or, I mean, and I guess it doesn't have to be a new person. It's just, and it was required by the new law. Is that what you're also saying?
Go ahead, please.
Yes, so that was another addition during last year's legislative session, that they should identify someone who provides the parental notification.
And line 241, I was just looking for 237, and this is mentioned several times. And I think it's also defined. Let's just look at the definition for a second. All right. I think what I was thinking, and forgive me for this, is a little bit tedious, but it's because the definition capitalizes it and identifies it as a proper noun. You maybe want to do that throughout in the rest of the rule. So to
Scum it up.
Good. That's, I think, what I was thinking. It was not even deeply contextual. It was just a dumb grammar thing. So thank you.
Hey.
That's all. Those are the questions I had.
Thank you.
And it's my turn to make motions.
Thank you,
right?
member there. Let me just check in. Chair Carey, did you have any questions or comments about this policy? Okay, go ahead. We're ready for a motion.
I move that the the committee approve R277-613 LAA policies and training regarding bullying, cyberbullying, hazing, retaliation, and abusive conduct. Draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Okay, thank you. All right, the motion on the table is that the committee approve R277-613 LAA policies and training regarding bullying, cyberbullying, hazing, retaliation, and abusive conduct, draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. All those in favor say aye.
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 And Chair Carey? Okay, if we can just note that he stepped away. But we do have enough. We have a majority vote, 3 out of 5. So there you go. Okay, thank you. Thank you, staff. We will go ahead and move on to item 1.9, R277-733, Adult Education Programs Incorporated document. And we will invite Deputy Superintendent Nui to introduce this.
So fast. I'm here for you. Thank you so much, Chair. Apologies. So we are bringing this rule to you 733 to only change the incorporated document. So we're not changing any of the rule except to update the document. So this is the document that we are changing, and it's largely to federal changes and also to be consistent with current practice to make sure that what we have in our policies and our manual reflect what is being done in the field and at the office. So you'll see this list right here that's on the screen of a summary of all of the changes that are made. You'll also see the document in backup that has all of the redlining so that you can see those changes as well. But we also have Stephanie Patton here who has worked on all of these changes and can answer your questions.
Okay, thank you. We'll go ahead. It looks like Member Lear, did you have a question?
I don't. No.
Okay. All right. And
if you're ready for the motion, though, I'll do that.
yeah, do you have any questions, concerns?
No, all these changes are mandated by law. They needed to be made. Does federal law mandate that we make these changes?
Go ahead, Stephanie.
No, not Stephanie Patton, post-secondary attainment coordinator. No, not all of these changes are mandated. The ones that are mandated are the assessment changes. Those were mandated federally. The other ones were like Deputy Superintendent Nui said, they're to align with current practice.
So we're just updating it to what we currently do with the incorporated document. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that's all I have. Question. Thank you.
All right. Chair Carey, any questions? All right, looks like we are ready for a motion.
I move that the committee approve R277-733 Adult Education Programs Incorporated document, Utah Adult Education Policies and Procedures Guide, draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Lear. All right, the motion on the table is that the committee approve R277-733 Adult Education Programs Incorporated document, Utah Adult Education Policies and Procedures Guide, draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Chair Carey? Okay, it looks like he stepped away for a moment. We have that has passed unanimously. We will go ahead and move on to item 1.10, R277-733 Adult Education Programs Amendment, and turning the time back to Deputy Superintendent Nui.
Thank you. So as I said in the last item, the changes that brought this rule to you are only in the incorporated document. So you'll see on line 24, we just updated that the incorporated document is now the June 2025 version rather than the May 2024. And that's the only change that's being made to the rule today.
Okay, thank you. Any questions
Comments?
No, but I'm ready to make a
Okay,
motion.
let's go ahead and move forward with the motion.
I move that the committee approve R277-733 Adult Education Programs, Draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Lear. The motion on the board is that the committee approve R277-733 Adult Education Programs, Draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. All those in favor say aye.
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 Chair Carey, we'll just check in. Okay, that passes unanimously. Right.
Chair, if I may,
Yes.
I need to step out to Finance Committee for another item. Would it be possible to flip-flop and do UPAC information item first and then do 608?
Yes, and in fact, I was going to suggest that we take a little break. And we have plenty of time, I think, that we can move forward if everybody's okay. We'll go ahead and take a 5-minute break and then we will go ahead and move that forward. Okay, thank you.
That's what we should.
Okay, welcome back. Thanks for allowing us to have that little break. We are going to actually go ahead and skip to item 1.12, review of UPAC investigative results, and turn the time over to Director Rasmussen.
Thank you, Chair. So what we'd like to do here is just kind of go through and let you get to know a little bit about UPAC's caseload and what that looks like. I've invited my attorney staff to join me. I'd like them to introduce themselves first, and I'd like to turn things over to Ashley, who will kind of take the lead on the discussion.
Hi, I'm Ashley Carter. I'm one of the UPAC attorneys.
Yeah.
My name is Christy Alcott, and I'm another UPAC attorney.
My name is Joanna Bell, and I'm the third UPAC attorney.
Okay, the biggest challenge that we face in UPAC is an ever increasing caseload coupled with a large backlog of cases. And as we've been discussing, each of these cases involves someone's career and also the safety of students. So each case needs to be given proper time and attention. These can't just be rushed. There's due process for teachers, right? Each one of these needs an adequate investigation. Like Board Member Lear was saying earlier, we do not aim to rubber stamp a district investigation, but we want to be fresh eyes to see what happened. Lots of times new witnesses turn up. We want to give these the time and attention they need. The result of this is that we end up with cases being open for a long time, which causes a variety of problems that we'll talk about. Today, I want to give you a quick overview of our UPAC case numbers so that you can understand our current situation. And feel free to jump in with questions if you have them while I go, or you can ask us questions at the end. Either way works. Okay, so this first slide, our annual UPAC cases. You can see with the exception of a dip following COVID, UPAC case numbers have continually increased over the past decade. In 2024, we had a record number of 173 new cases, and this includes investigations and also expedited hearings on our minor misconduct issues. It does not include the expedited hearings that we did on minor criminal issues such as DUIs and domestic violence. We are not even halfway through 2025, but we already have 93 cases this year. So I predict that we will have 200 new UPAC cases in 2025, which would be a record. Why do we have so many cases? It's because UPAC is getting a lot of referrals every month. A couple of years ago, it was typical for UPAC to have maybe 20 referrals a month. Now 40 to 50 is typical. A large portion of this increase is from the change in the board rule requiring LEAs to refer parent complaints. That does account for a lot of these, but there are also just more referrals originating in the LEAs, as well as referrals from our internal audit hotline each month.
Ashley, can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
Can you recollect the exact or about what like month and year that those changes were made, just so the public can understand that?
I believe that board rule went into effect January 2024.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the blue bars on this graph show how many investigations UPAC opened each month in the last 2 years, because they don't open every single referral that comes in. And you can see in recent months, if you look at those recent blue bars, that it's been common for UPAC to open a dozen or so investigations per month. UPAC has a meeting next week, and we currently have received 72 referrals to review. So that would actually be off the chart on this chart. And there's still a week to go where more referrals will come in. So I expect that referrals and new cases will continue to increase. Sure. Either way. Okay, Ben, you can go ahead to the next one. UPAC currently has 3 attorney investigators, and we each aim to complete 4 investigations per month, or 12 investigations total. Since UPAC is often opening more than 12 cases a month, it's a battle just to break even. However, the real problem is that backlog of cases. I updated this morning after the board closed some cases last night. We currently have 116 open investigations. Now, in 13 of those, we've already presented an investigative report to UPAC, and UPAC has made a recommendation. So we're dealing with what I call the back end of cases, which is where we're waiting for the educators to accept their discipline. We're preparing for hearings, waiting for board approval, et cetera. So that leaves 103 cases that are waiting to be investigated. So if you do the math, what this means is that a case that is opened by UPAC next week at our meeting probably won't be investigated for 9 months. And if we have attorney turnover, it will take longer. Between 2022 and 2023, 4 UPAC attorneys quit. At the time, we only had two UPAC attorneys, so you can see what a high percentage that is of turnover. And each time an attorney quits, we fall behind in our investigations for several months until a new attorney can be hired and get up to speed.
And Ashley, are you fully staffed with the FTE that's been allocated currently, or Director Rasmussen?
So we have 2 permanent FTEs. Joanna's position is term limited. The position we asked the legislature for would have been to make Joanna's position permanent, but we do feel like we need at least to make that position permanent to be fully staffed.
And to follow up on that, there's maybe some debate about whether you hire additional FTE to address the backlog, which may help, but then you're talking about being able to keep up. There's obviously an increase in referrals as well, right? And so do you have an idea or recommendation of what it would take, like what permanent FTE and maybe additional FTE to catch up with the backlog, or is that still being determined based off of your data dive?
It's kind of ongoing and it's kind of evolving how many cases we're getting. We're seeing record numbers right now, and it still remains to be seen whether that will continue or whether that will increase as Ashley has projected, or what, kind of how that will happen. Right now, we definitely need one additional attorney, we think permanent. If the case numbers continue to go up, that's something we'll have to continue to evaluate.
And is that one additional to Joanna's position? So that's permanent, or to make her permanent?
That would be to make her permanent.
At a minimum.
And if I may, I think it just depends on what length of time the board is comfortable with these cases taking, because it's just a math problem. So with 3 of us, we're able to, if it stays about 12 new cases being opened a month, new investigations being open a month, then we'll probably stay at that. It's an 11-month case median right now. So that will keep us there, which is quite long, but that's what it is. If we get more attorneys, then we could do the math and figure out. I would love to see us doing cases in 6 months. We have a presumption, or that if it takes longer than 6 months, that the board is supposed to consider reducing the suspension. I don't like it when that has to be triggered. It just means, there's all sorts of problems that we'll talk about, but.
Yeah, that is true. And that's one of the discussions we've had as a board, right? If it takes a year and then you get a year suspension, that really turns out to be 2 years. So, okay, that's helpful. Member Lear, do you have a question?
Yeah, I did. Going back, can you go back to the slide that had the long blue bars? Yes, that one, or long orange ones. So it says reviewed are the orange ones. And I'm just assuming that those are the ones that and I'm not sure who they're reviewed by. Are they literally reviewed by UPAC?
Yes.
And then the UPAC decision is this doesn't need to be investigated. Is that what? Anyway, the difference between looking at the last section of green and blue, opened 15, reviewed 48, and then a few expedited. So, so there are a lot that, can you just give us a sense of when UPAC reviews those? Are you guys in the room when UPAC reviews those?
Yes, they are.
And is it a 5-minute experience for UPAC? Is it 20? Is there a dramatic difference or?
For each case?
Yes.
I mean, it's closer to a minute. I mean, we give them all the background materials in advance so they can read the entire, they get all the documents that the LEA or the parent submits. They're expected to read that in advance, and most of them do. And then we do go through them quickly once it gets into the commission. And we discuss.
So 5 minutes, 10?
Closer to a minute per case.
And does the respondent get a chance to give them any information at that point?
Not during the decision of whether to open a case, no.
Not to open a case. So you're just doing it based on the information you have, primarily probably from the LEA.
Most of the time, the LEA will submit the statement that the educator gave in their packet.
So there is that.
Yeah.
Okay. I had another question. Let's just keep going and we'll.
Okay, go ahead, Ashley.
Okay, so we've talked about the getting to the UPAC recommendation, but of course that's not the end of the case. If UPAC recommends discipline, the educator still has to accept the discipline or have a hearing, and the board has to approve all the recommendations. So that process adds at least a month and sometimes many months if there's a hearing or if there's a remand or if it's drawn out for whatever reason. So this chart shows the total number of months between UPAC opening a case and board approval. And the educator's Cactus account is flagged this entire time. The median time is 11 months. You'll see there are a few that are over 24 months. Those are criminal cases, typically involving a jury trial. Oftentimes the educator is either in prison or at least out of work. So
another question. Can I ask a question to that? How often is the delay because of the respondent? Or I mean, I know there'll be a couple of weeks, but how often is there a long delay because of the respondent?
Do you mean throughout the whole process or just when it comes to accepting discipline, or the whole process?
Well, I guess the whole process, but I'm more thinking of, I'm kind of looking for a generalization about it. If the median is 11 months, is that often, sometimes, occasionally?
I would say sometimes due to the respondent. Some of them are hard to get a hold of. We have to mail letters, that sort of thing to even get them to engage in the investigation. Sometimes they take a long time deciding what they want to do. They request a hearing, then they change their mind and they finally sign the consent to discipline on the eve of hearing. But I would say that is like a smaller percentage. Most of this is just because of the volume of cases.
Great. That's helpful.
Thank you.
I have one real quick too.
Go ahead, Member Hall. Okay.
How often is there an appeal?
So we have a slide on that coming up in a minute, but
I'll wait on
it is a small percentage, but it's a considerable amount of our time for that. It's like a trial. So yeah, so that's coming up. Okay, so as we're looking at this, the amount of time this takes, there's obvious problems. I'm going to list 5 that I see. One is that teachers might be in the classroom who should be suspended, which poses a risk to students. 2, that educators, they experience great stress during this process. Their careers are often put on hold. Some of them we end up finding no violation ultimately. So their careers are put on hold for 11 months, when ultimately we have found no violation. 3rd, parents and victims are often really frustrated to be dealing with a UPAC issue months after the event occurred. You call them and they're like, why are we still talking about this, right? 4, witnesses move and memories fade, so it can be hard to prove what happened. Finally, 5, LEAs have uncertainty about whether their educators will be available to work in the future or whether they need to hire new people. Okay, so some good news, a little bit of good news, is that we have been able to resolve most of our oldest, what I call stale cases. We used to have some lingering from years ago. as you can see from this chart, we only have 3 cases that were opened prior to 2024. One is a criminal case, a DUI homicide that's going to UPAC for a recommendation next week. The other 2 are criminal cases that also have trials scheduled this year. So that's why there's a few lingerings, but most are within the last 2 years, thank goodness. The next case, if you're, yeah.
Can I comment?
Yes, go ahead, Member Lair.
I don't have much sympathy or concern for those. I mean, those are completely out of all of our control. So I know they're probably annoying to you, but those are not the ones I'm worried about. And those people have been long out of the classroom. And so there's really not concern for the parents or general population. There's so that just as an aside.
Yeah, we still don't like them on our books, but it does eliminate some of those other problems. So if you're wondering what, you can go to the next one, Ben. If you're wondering what all these cases are, here's a breakdown. Boundary violations continue to reign as the most common type of UPAC case, followed by violence and discipline. Next.
Can you just pause on back there a minute so we can.
Yeah. And that third, the purple one, the moral ethical misconduct, that's a little bit of a catch-all. That includes, I looked up what that includes. It includes things like non-sexual crimes. So a lot of our criminals who are either doing theft or fraud that are more serious. That includes failure to report cases, inappropriate communication with colleagues, that sort of thing.
Go ahead, Member Hall.
What's boundary violations?
Oh, so educators are expected to maintain a professional educator-student relationship. And so that's when they are getting too close to a student. So it can be texting, it can be having inappropriate conversations, giving gifts, and it can be severe or minor. But
That's usually a warning, right?
no, well, it depends. So a lot of them are suspensions. It depends if it's minor, it's a warning. If it's egregious or repetitive, it's a reprimand. And if it's a pattern, which we see a lot of patterns when they develop a real relationship with a student, they're spending time outside of school, that sort of thing. Those are suspensions.
Go ahead, Member Lair.
This is more of a discussion, kind of a comment than a, but I think it's interesting that you have some of the boundary violations and it's that come about even with the parent. It's hard to know what to do when the parents are, if not complicit, the parents are approving, and yet the school people are arguing, but it's still not okay. And the parents are arguing, but I'm glad that an adult took an interest in my child. And I think those are hard to know what to do. And they're buried in the rest of them that are more sort of with a different intent. And I think those are hard to understand. And I also think we have to factor in that some of these boundary violations come about in really small communities where, you know, your teacher is also your youth leader in your church, and your teacher is your parent's best friend, and your teacher is your swimming teacher. And so I sometimes think when people hear boundaries, they get really offended and really horrified. And some of the times it's just the nature. And to be frank, I think sometimes the smaller schools not really sort of kind of promote this family atmosphere that then results in boundary violations.
Yeah. And we talk about that when we do trainings. We go out and we warn them. We're like, there are a few things to really look out for. Small schools, coaching situations. This is another time when boundaries can easily be crossed. But, you know, we try to focus on that and warn them. Keep your administration, be involved with your administration, be transparent about everything, right? If you're in this tiny community and your student is also your child's best friend, and so they do a lot together, like just be very, very transparent and still I tell them play defense, right? Like be very careful.
I think it puts educators really impossible.
Yeah. Okay, so did we want to move on to outcomes? So this shows final outcomes of investigations after board approval. This is from January 2022 up through the May board meeting. I haven't updated this from last night, but if you look at the outcomes, you'll see we've had about an equal number of suspensions, reprimands, and warnings. That's the purple, blue, and green.
Contrary to what Member Carey says, reprimand is not our favorite word.
I was going to say, Chair Carey, that 23% is the highest.
Yeah. And you may have seen from the other backup materials that I looked back at all the reprimands. Most people that get a reprimand, if they don't keep their job at a time, they'll never get employed again. So it's.
Sorry, I just have to jump in. I'm just the excited utterance. I think that's a really important point for board members to understand is that I think the sense of from some board members and maybe members of the public is a reprimand is a slap on the wrist. If you look at that, I think you have a slide to that effect coming up, don't you?
We didn't put it in this, but it's in the materials.
It's in our backup that shows it's like 9% of the people who get a reprimand, they don't get a job. Only 9% get a job.
At a new LEA. So
Right,
if they've stayed employed, most of them will just hunker down and stay there forever.
Well, if the LEA doesn't fire them.
If they don't get fired. If they get fired, then you're right, it's very hard to get a new job.
And as I've just anecdotally looked through these cases, that's one of the things I looked for with reprimand. I'll tell you, I ask him if it's not evident, did that person keep her job? And if it's a no, then we go to the only 9% get a job. That's a very small number because our numbers seem big, but 9% of what is say 200 a year, if that the very highest, that's maybe only 20 people. And I would love to know where they get jobs. I think that might be telling too. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, so if we break this down by year, I thought it was a little bit interesting that you'll see in the last year and a half, there's been a higher percentage of discipline, so reprimands, suspensions, revocations, rather than warnings and no action. You see that purple section getting a little bigger, suspensions, and that does not include, I believe there were 6 suspensions approved by the board yesterday, so that would even be relatively bigger on the 2025 year there, and a revocation. Okay, go ahead, Ben. So this is what you were asking about with hearings. As attorney investigators, we spend a substantial amount of our time dealing with the post-investigation matters. So all of our time, I wish we could just churn out new investigations all the time, but there is in order to give the educators due process, there is a lot on the backside. So when UPAC recommends discipline, we prepare a document called a consent to discipline, and 85% of the educators accept their discipline by signing this. That's the quick way to do it. Some take a few months to do it, but most of them just sign. The other 15% either never respond, which is a default, or they exercise their right to a hearing, which takes a lot more time and resources. That's like a trial that we put on with witnesses and evidence and the whole shebang. So it has been very helpful to have a third UPAC attorney this year. And I really hope we'll be able to keep that position going forward so that our backlog does not continue to increase. We believe it's in the best interests of students, teachers, and LEAs to resolve UPAC cases in a timely manner. And we really appreciate your support. We know that you guys spend a lot of time reading our reports. Some of them can be long, and that you carefully consider all of these UPAC cases. So thank you.
Questions can we answer?
Sure, I just had one that fled.
All right, we'll go to Member Hall.
I was just going to say, this is very helpful for me, but I don't know why we wouldn't want the whole board to have the opportunity to be able to hear this. I think it's necessary because it just brings a lot of things into focus, a lot of things into context that you don't understand when you're reading through those reports and how those, decisions were come about. So you guys do the investigation. Is a lot of it done on site? Are you interviewing them?
So most of it we do over the phone and via Zoom.
Okay.
So occasionally we'll meet with someone in person.
And then once you gather all the findings, you bring it to the UPAC committee.
Right. They get the same report you do with just, without the recommendation.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Member Lear?
When you interview them on the phone, if they have an attorney, is the attorney with them?
Yes.
Even on the phone?
Yeah, and we do that over Zoom. We do all the educator interviews over Zoom because we like to be able to look at them and, talk to them. And the attorney's always there if they have one.
Do you know what percentage of accused educators are represented by attorneys?
Christy, you did that.
Yes, I do.
That research, didn't you?
All right, so we have unrepresented 62% and represented 38%.
That's higher than I would think it would be. I mean, to have them represented, I was thinking it was lower than that.
And to address some of your questions earlier about if they lighter sentences when they were represented, I actually have a graph in there that shows representation in appeal hearings. So it's actually interesting. Underrepresented, it had 4 people that their sentence got, or not sentence, but consequence got lighter, and then 2 people that it stayed the same. When they were represented, we have 3 people that had harsher consequences with attorneys present. That didn't happen when they were unrepresented. So it does kind of show it's not necessarily better with an attorney.
It's an intimidating process, but I think it's often helpful to an educator if they go into a hearing and just kind of speak for themselves. Sometimes attorneys may try and be attorneys a little too much, and it may not always.
I think
be
it
of benefit to
really
the
depends on
client.
the attorney.
Yes,
It
definitely.
really, I mean, if you get a person who's familiar with the process and familiar with education, then you'll get a better, I think, the outcome. And that's completely you can't quantify that. I understand that. Shoot, I did have another question though, and it had to do with the, and I don't know if you've gathered data on this. The individuals, and I don't know how much you guys have to do with the background check process. Very little?
I handle that process.
All of it? I think there is a lot of public misunderstanding that you knew this was a bad guy and he's been in the system, she's been in the system for 20, and I was always interested and pretty astounded, frankly, that and maybe this would be an interesting piece of information to develop, that maybe 1% of teachers who have problems have background check problems.
Yeah.
Those background check issues on the worst offenders. So if we looked at the revocation from yesterday, that person likely had no background check problems. So it's not like we're not being careful at the front end.
Yeah, our laws are very thorough on that. Every educator goes through a background check before they can get their teaching license or be in the classroom, and we have ongoing background checks so that if anything occurs, we get notified of that. And
my point is kind of the opposite. My point is that it's kind of a Dumbo's feather, because your bad guys are not the people who have background checks that you identified. Granted,
that's what I was about to say, is most of the background checks we do get are things like shoplifting or minor misdemeanor DUIs.
When they're 19
from
stuff
years
like
ago.
that. And I would love at some point to talk a little bit more about that process, which seems, I think, more onerous for some people than it needs to be when it's a very old situation. But I was curious about the background check comparison. So maybe think about that, Ben. Because I think that might give assurance to the public that there is this process, and almost none of these problem children arise from having a problem. And even if their background check is sort of dismissed or sidelined, it's not like they go on. The other thing that I think would be interesting data, and you can tell me if you've got anything on this, is my experience was there are very few repeat offenders. Do you have any data on that?
We haven't collected data, but I can just tell you, I feel like, you saw the number of cases we had per year. Last year was 174, this year at 93. I think we have maybe like 3 come back each year.
Each year, you think?
Yeah. Since I've been here 2.5 years, and I've dealt with a couple people multiple times.
Are they the same bad act, or is it they were initially in trouble for
there's been some of
alcohol
both,
and then it turns into
there's been some of both.
Okay.
Some that repeat their boundary violations just don't seem to get it. And then someone else who did one thing and then came back with drugs at school. So it's like,
I think that also might be because I'm looking for data. I'm looking for a broad variety of data, but data that shows that the system is working. And I think that's one of the examples that the system is working, that the person was disciplined for this. And same with people who are reinstated. And they're pretty notorious if they're reinstated and then there's a problem. And I remember a couple of those during my tenure. But my experience was there are maybe 2 over 20 years who are reinstated and then reoffend.
yeah.
So that both says your reinstatement process is good and I think more robust than many states, and that it's often just, however, it's just, it's not evil behavior as much as it is just thoughtless, careless, naive behavior on the part of teachers. So I think that might be interesting data also.
One thing I've found is interesting, and we don't do that many reinstatement hearings relative to how many people we suspend, right? But
which is another important.
Yeah, and
They
I
go
think we
away
have
forever.
some data in that. They do. And the one I was going to say, some of the ones that come back, I would say about half of them don't have plans to teach again. They just want to be able to volunteer in their kids' classroom, or they just want to clear this up for personal reasons. But, there's not that many that come back and say, I have a job offer and I'm starting. A lot of them are they're doing something else, but they just want reinstatement. So they're not necessarily back in the classroom.
And I think that if we had that in some kind of a bar chart, that would be interesting.
We just want all sorts of data.
I
To
know.
piggyback off of that as well, I mean, it's interesting because we've also been diving into audit and like complaints, right? And so they have this big database, and then you can disaggregate the data based off of certain things. And that would be my question. Like every time we get these UPAC cases coming through, I'm looking at, because we do a lot of letters of education, right? And sometimes I'm looking at what are the frequency of these boundary violations with LEA specific licenses, right? Like they're going through non-traditional pathways, or they're going through like a competency-based university. Do we have a database that has those parts of information that we could then disaggregate to get some percentages on?
It
Ben?
would take a little manpower to do that. It could be done, but it would just be a matter of finding someone who could take the data that we have and get into Cactus and see who's had what types of licenses.
Yeah, just another FTE.
Well, I wasn't.
I mean, that's fair, right? You have more demands, you need the manpower, but that's fair. But I do think that for me, it's like, when we talk about being proactive, right? If there's ways where we can see patterns of behavior or those types of things, maybe we can make sure that those coming out of a LEA have an additional, training requirement, or, something in our licensing process to help hopefully prevent that. Because, when we read these cases, sometimes I'm like, oh, I didn't know. And for me, that I've gone through, I'm on the other end of it, and I've been in education for 24 years. I'm like, how did you not know this? Like, this is 101, right? And so I would be curious to know. That's something I think that we could have ongoing discussions. If we're asking for more FTE, then let's get some data FTE too, right? Okay, Member Lear, did you have another comment?
I had a similar point, and that was not only what was their training, what kind of training did they have, but I also would like to be able to see if you folks do the training and your time is limited, and I'd like to see if we have data about what schools are these problems occurring in. Are they occurring in traditional schools? Are they occurring in rural schools? Are they occurring in more urban settings? Are they is it more secondary, elementary, those kinds of things, because then you can target your training, which I think would seem like a wise thing to do given your limitations.
One of the slides we were working on and didn't include did show the number of cases by LEA. It doesn't go necessarily into by school or specifically, but that may be something we can work on for the future.
Well, partners are an LEA, so you can get a picture of.
Yeah, and that was one of the branches.
Harder.
And honestly, I mean, this is completely just, my gut from having dealt with these cases for the last few years, but they're really, to me, they seem to come from all of the above, right? And to me, it just seems like there's just a percentage of deviance in any organization, right? And I think so I do think they're coming from everywhere. And yeah, we can adapt our training when we train in a smaller district versus a, city district.
And right there actually is where I kind of differ. I think my experience was, you said deviance, and I know you were using the word loosely, but my experience was it was just as often cluelessness. Very few of the people I encountered were intentionally grooming. I just don't, I think that is a myth that is perpetuated. I found far more people who were just not understanding that they had to keep a distance between.
And I should clarify that, because I do think there are deviants when I'm talking about like sex offenders and, a certain level. But I talk all the time to Ben and my colleagues about how I do think there's a spectrum of people who mean well and make an honest mistake, right? And then down to the people who are actually predatory and they have children available to prey on, right? And so I think when I say deviant, I'm certainly talking about that side of the spectrum. But
which, again, my experience was it's a very small number. I reflect back, and I was young. I agree, when I was teaching high school, and some of the things that I did with those high school students, I think I would never do that again. I had no idea. And I think there's teachers, and I was, fairly sophisticated, even though I was young, but I mean, you get caught up in that world and you don't realize that you can't go golfing with your students.
Okay. All right. Any other additional comments or questions, Member Hall?
One more question.
Yes, please.
Okay, Vice Chair.
Absolutely.
So a board member, Carrie, brought this up earlier, but if there is a victim, is there a process? Is UPAC involved in that? Does that responsibility fall on the LEA? How does that work?
So it's kind of a case by case basis, because we really try not to re-victimize students by, alleged victims by dragging them through another investigation. Some of these are young kids, right? And they've already been interviewed. We really rely on the LEA to do the initial investigation. And sometimes there's a written statement or something that we can use. A lot of times we'll reach out to the parent, right? Sometimes the parents are like, oh, my child would love to talk to you. This would be great. Let's, here they are. I'm with them. We'll put them on the phone right now. I would say most of the time we don't end up re-interviewing the student. I have a case right now where there was a sexual encounter between a educator and a student. The student has now graduated. So I've been in contact with him and, he's involved. So it really kind of depends each time, but we try not to go back to the student if we can at all handle it by talking to the parents, as long as we feel if it's a critical case where it's a word against word and this person's testimony really matters, we might have to involve the student.
So when it comes to the care and what that student really needs, as they've gone through the process, does that fall on the LEA basically?
I would say so. We're not providing like services and support to the student. We try to be very sympathetic and kind and tell them we're so sorry they've been involved in this situation and that sort of thing, but we're not offering any services.
Okay.
Yeah. And I would say just in an administrative role, that's the role of the administration and the LEAs, is to make sure they're providing a safe environment and doing what they need to for any kind of interventions or supports or services that should fall on the LEA. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
I really appreciate the data. I have been bugging people for data for 5 years, and I really, and I think there's some more to gather. Yeah. I think could be informative.
Yeah, we'll have audit maybe help with
but I really
their dashboard.
Thank you for listening.
And I would be in touch. I would love to talk with you and just see what your procedures and jobs look like now, and how that, and if there's some insight I could get.
In most cases.
Okay, we are going to go ahead and go back on our agenda now that Deputy Superintendent Newey is here. to item 1.11, R277-608, Emergency Safety Interventions and Prohibition of Corporal Punishment Amendment. So Deputy Superintendent Newey.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Okay, so we are proposing, if you recall, in last year, we made some significant changes to 608. It used to be just the prohibition of corporal punishment. In 2024, we split Rule 609 that you saw yesterday and incorporated all of the emergency safety intervention material into 608. So that was the change that was made last year. The changes that you're seeing before you today are a result of SB 170. That's from Senator Escamilla, the school discipline amendments, and that changed some of the expectations and the code requirements when it comes to the use of emergency safety interventions in schools. So we wanted to make sure that our rule reflected that code change, as well as give some additional guidance to schools. So you'll see we are bringing draft 1 to you today. There's just a few changes when it comes to references and updating language. I will also highlight that we'll talk more about this, but the code requires greater reporting from LEAs on the use of ESIs in their schools. And because there is a significant increase in that reporting and our staffs need to look at that data and monitor and keep that data, we are requesting that we bump this up to a category 3 in the oversight category. So that is one change that we're proposing today. We also changed several of the definitions to match what is in code or to make things more clear, such as in disengagement strategies, what exactly that means and what that looks like. We also streamlined the definition for immediate and significant threat. We kind of had that separated into imminent risk and immediate danger, and we kind of put all of that together so that the language is consistent throughout the rule. Clarified school employee. Like we talked about yesterday, school employee is a pretty broad definition that we use for all rules, but in this case, school employee does not mean a law enforcement officer. So we want to make sure that that's really clear, that that is not included in when we talk about school employee for the purposes of this rule. I think there was a few cuts, again, just to make it consistent. And then at the bottom of the rule is the bulk, I think, of the changes that we would really like you to notice. And that is right here in subsection 8. These are the LEA responsibilities and reporting. And there is a list in the code of all of the data points that need to be collected by an LEA and reported to USBE. And those include that the incident occurred, as well as the duration, the purpose behind the intervention, any alternative interventions that were used and attempted, information about the student, and then what training opportunities the staff members involved had. So that is what is going to be reported to USBE. Hopefully this is working. And then there are some additional superintendent responsibilities. We now need to include all of that information into an annual report that would go to the Education Interim Committee on an annual basis. We also have a couple of questions and policy considerations we would like to bring to you today, and we have some slides to make that clear, if that would be okay to share those at this time.
Yeah, before we move to that, looks like Member Lear has a question.
I have a question and a comment, and maybe an amendment, but are some of these changes caused by or fueled by the safety bills that have passed in the last 2 years? Is there overlap with that? Not really.
I don't think so, no.
Not
There are discipline bills and things like that, but not these school safety bills.
HB 40.
Yeah, no.
No. I mean, I just wondered if some of the definitions came from that.
No, these are from like Senator Escamilla's bill specifically about discipline and the use of ESIs.
Gotcha. Okay, that's helpful. And then looking at line, is it okay if I go ahead?
Yeah, please.
Line 40. an emergency safety intervention is not used, and you've repeated this several times. So you may want to look and see if you can just say it once. And I didn't write down the lines where it was repeated. That's not even my main point. I was wondering if you're really trying to say the stronger version of shall not be used for disciplinary procedures or purposes, is that what you're intending to say? Is that the intent?
It's a good question. I'm like putting on my lawyer hat because I think by definition, if it's being used for a disciplinary purpose, it is not an ESI. And that's kind of the distinction that I wanted to make, that if this is happening as a result of an action as a consequence, then it cannot be defined as an ESI. So I'm okay with either language or however we want to put that, but as long as that is clear.
And I think it would be helpful for people who are told this is not what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
If it were a shall, but if you mean it as a should, then this maybe language is a little better. So I'm just trying to.
Yeah, either way. And we also have staff here who can comment if there's specific questions.
I would love, because I think that's pretty important because if an employee does it wrong, there are going to be consequences.
Okay, we'll invite staff up.
So Ashley Lauer, I'm a behavior specialist and have been working with Elise on this rule. And I think I'm not a lawyer, so the difference between shall and should, I'm not as clear on, but I think the key is we don't want these practices being used for disciplinary purposes. And so in what is now 53G 8301, which came from that bill, there is specific language. It's only related to seclusion in the bill or now in the code that says that seclusion cannot be used as an intervention or disciplinary practice. But in the rule, we're trying to, and this was in the rule previously, but is continued there to say neither physical restraint or seclusion should be used as a disciplinary practice or in response to a behavior, and being clear that it can only be used if there is an immediate and significant threat. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but hopefully that gives a little bit more context.
Close, but I guess that to really answer it, we need to say an emergency safety intervention is maybe seclusion, but what else is included under emergency? And it's probably in these or in some definition, maybe.
Yes, it is in the definition for emergency safety intervention. We've just, in the rule now, we're just citing code, but that definition in code is, so it says emergency safety intervention means the use of seclusion or physical restraint when a student presents an immediate danger to self or others. So it's seclusion or physical restraint.
So I think I would like to make a motion on that. Is that okay?
Yeah, please.
Okay. On line 40, I'd like it because I'm looking to, of course, protect children, but I also want it clear for employees for whom there'll be consequences. So I would move on line 40 that we say an emergency safety intervention shall not be used for disciplinary purposes.
Okay, and did you want to speak further to that motion?
I pretty much did. I just think it provides clarity and protection both.
Okay. Any discussion to that motion? Is Chair Carey online? He's not right now. Okay. All right. So if there is no further discussion, let's go ahead and take a vote on the motion is that the committee amend line 40 to read ESI shall not be used for disciplinary purposes. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. That is unanimous.
A similar related, I could have made them at the same time if I can.
Yes, go ahead, member.
Okay. I'd like, and I'm not asking for it right now, so it's sort of a non-substantive change, but I'd like you to look through the rule before it comes to the board and see if if this statement is repeated other times, that you can just make sure we state it once. Thanks. That's the only, so it's not really a motion, just.
Okay, just a recommendation. Okay. I do have a question on line 213. It's fascinating to me because when you had that code pulled up, in code, it basically says seclusion can't be used as an intervention, yet we're saying it's an emergency safety intervention. And that wording is, am I the only one that's confused about this? I mean, I just feel like when we talk about, like, we have to fill out an emergency safety intervention document, but we're saying we can't use that as an intervention, but that by definition is what it specifically is. So is that something that we need to go back and work with our legislators on clarifying that language, or could someone help me understand that?
Sure, I can see that being very confusing, and you'll notice in the code there's some confusion too, where intervention is used. That is the term that was used previously, and it was kind of a term of art, emergency safety intervention. But we could look at maybe adjusting that language to make it clear that it is not a behavioral intervention like we're talking about in a lot of other circumstances, but this is a specific practice that is used in this specific circumstance or instance.
Okay, so would you say that that's something that would be better where we change our vocabulary surrounding that, or is that something that we need to have?
Well, I think because, so the term emergency safety intervention is in the code and it's defining that, so that may be something that we need to work with, but we can talk more about how best we might go about something like that.
Yeah, I just want that to be on the radar. I think that's something that we need to consider. It is really confusing. Like, so you can't use it as an intervention, but you're using it as an intervention.
Sure, but the term is.
Yes, member Lair.
I have a thought, or maybe, I don't know if this completely addresses it, but what if it said, a school employee may not use seclusion as a behavioral intervention or disciplinary intervention? Because it is behavioral. So as a disciplinary intervention, does that help at all?
I mean, I just think it's confusing that they have emergency safety, right? You're using it as a safety intervention, but I see what you're saying. So as a behavioral intervention, would that help clarify if we did that in rule, or would we prefer to? Yeah. Can you pull up the code?
Yeah, and I'm probably thinking the better word is disciplinary intervention, because it is, any intervention seems like it's about behavior.
Yeah, so it says emergency safety intervention means the use of seclusion or safety restraint when a student presents an immediate danger to self or others.
So that makes sense. So intervention.
So it can't be used as an intervention, but it can be used as a safety, emergency safety intervention is basically what we're saying.
Can I offer a thought?
Yes, please.
The word intervention in the code is used in a couple of different ways. There are alternative interventions that are listed. There are safety interventions. So I do feel it would be helpful to clarify as a behavioral intervention. There's also disciplinary interventions. And so those, there's lots of different confusing words in there. So I do feel like that would offer some clarification.
In the code or in the rule?
Well, and I think that's up to you all to decide if you want to address it in the rule or the code. Oh, are you asking where the different words are in the code?
No, I'm just saying, it seems, just reading this quickly, it seems like the problem is more in the rule than in the code. To me.
Wait, slide back up.
Yeah.
Go.
Oh.
Or sorry.
Scroll down, yeah.
There you go. Except.
So as an emergency safety intervention, only when they have a policy.
Will you go back up to A? So it says a school may not, except as provided in subsection 10B, use seclusion as an intervention or disciplinary practice.
If I may, we have several other questions about this, and we were anticipating wanting to clear that up with the sponsor of the bill. And potentially work on legislation for next year. So we actually have a meeting scheduled with her in July prior to this coming before the full board. So if there are other things that we want to bring up with her and potentially look for legislative changes, we'd be happy to do that or invite you all and you can be part of that conversation.
So, Elise, does that mean, is this policy, because we have it on our calendar today, is this something then that is not as time pressing? It's just becoming in compliance with the law, but
one time pressing part of it, and I'll let our specialist speak to it as well, is the data collection and kind of the monitoring piece that we want that in place when the school year starts, or at least schools to have a pretty clear idea of how and that data is going to be collected and things. And there are trainings as well happening at the beginning of the year on these kinds of things. And so to make that clear, so we'd like to get it passed. That's why we were kind of hoping to take advantage of the gap in July to talk to her before it goes to full board. But
so with that being said, we could potentially make some changes to a draft coming out of committee to have it ready for our August full board if it's the will of this committee. Okay. Any other additional comments to that from staff?
I think Elise said a lot of what I would have said about the data reporting requirements. There also are some slight policy pieces that, making sure that the LEAs have the time to get their policies up to date as well. So we're trying to take that into consideration as well as we were making a decision on whether we needed to have these questions answered before we brought it to committee or kind of trying to do that as we're going through the process before it goes to the full board.
Thank you, Ashley. Member Lear?
Here's another problem, right, as the kind of repeats or emphasizes what we were just talking about. Line 176, a school employee may not use physical restraint, which is a kind of intervention, right? Physical restraint or seclusion, as a means of discipline or punishment. So we know they're not supposed to use it as discipline, but is it also there? And so maybe we take that out because it's a repeat, because it's a type of seclusion, but the punishment part is, this is another thing that it can't be used for. Am I reading that accurately? Chris Ann is looking baffled and it's hard to see all of her.
Chris Ann?
Sorry.
No,
I just want to make sure that I'm following what you're saying. So it is your question, do we need the words discipline and punishment in that sentence?
Because you've always said can't use physical restraint because it's a type of ESI.
Correct.
As for discipline.
Correct. So we can't,
and you also can't use it for punishment is what you're saying.
Correct. Both of those are true.
So I'm just wondering if one's repetitive and one's maybe new. I don't know if this is the first time it says this, but I'm wondering if maybe though they ought to be together. So and I'm just thinking out loud. I don't even know how to amend it right now, but the school employee may not use a physical restraint as a means of A, discipline, as a means of B, punishment, so that they're clear. And then maybe at the same time you say, here's what you're supposed to use it for. I don't know, but it sounds like there's going to be some reworking of this.
And it does sound like you had mentioned that you had a slideshow you guys wanted to present. Do we want, let's go ahead and move to that and see what other changes they're recommending, and then we can go from there.
That one that we'll have to vote on. Did we voted on it? The one that shall.
Okay, so we have two kind of policy questions that we wanted to present to you as a board to make kind of a call on what next steps should be, because we have a few different options. So the first is issues with data reporting. In the bill, so in SB 170, it requires that we collect each of these particular data items from every time that a school uses an ESI. And currently, we have no mechanism for collecting this data. This isn't in UTREX. This isn't in any of our existing systems. We are working to get that going, but of course that takes some time, and we want to be in compliance with the law as much as possible. So new fields are going to be built into UTREX to meet that data reporting requirements, but it probably will not be ready for until the 26-27 school year. So our question for you all is, how do we support LEAs in collecting this data in the meantime? So there's a few different options that we have thought through. The first is just to wait until UTREX is ready and just kind of let the sponsor know and just know that there's going to be a gap in the data collection process. The second could be a Qualtrics survey where LEAs put in their end of year data. So it's just one survey that they fill out once a year that includes all of the data that they've collected throughout the school year. And then the third would be kind of a Qualtrics survey where every time an ESI is used, there is a link that is available on our website or some other platform where they can go in, fill in this data all at once and input it every single time that they use an ESI. So we'd be collecting data on an ongoing basis throughout the year. I will say that, so on Wednesdays before board meeting, we have meetings with the in-house counsel for districts as well as superintendents and charter directors. And we ran this question by them to say, here's kind of the dilemma that we're in. What would you prefer? And of those that responded, option 3 was the one that they preferred, just because then it cuts down on the amount of data they have to keep and remember where it's at and have somebody remember to do it at the end of the year, that it would just be simpler. So that's our first policy quandary for you.
Thank you for that. I would say, I mean, was going to say option 2, but my concern with option 2 would be that because they aren't new data requirements, then they may not have the data. We don't want them to get to the end of the year and say, oh, we didn't know we were supposed to collect all of this data, right? And I think option 3 would be a good way to then, it's almost like used as a training mechanism as well, right? If schools get used to collecting that data, because it's everything that's on the Qualtrics survey. So that would just look like they click on a link, they fill in exactly the data that we were already asking, but they still at a LEA level have to keep track of that on a district, on a LEA level.
Yes, that's correct. They would still keep track of that on the LEA level. And I would say there are some LEAs who have already been collecting more comprehensive data. It just hasn't been reported to us because there also is a district level ESI committee that is reviewing all of the incidents of both, or the use of both seclusion and physical restraint. So they would still have that data in that capacity.
Right. So my question also would be, did we have any of the LEAs that had, I mean, when we said we don't have a way to report this data, but our LEAs are collecting it. And I realized that at a state level, that's a way bigger amount of data. Are any of their systems scalable to a state level? Do we know?
I can't speak to everyone throughout the state because I don't know what everyone is using, but we have had a few LEAs who have contacted us with questions and just to run some ideas. And at this point, I don't know that any of them are scalable. Most of them are using something like a spreadsheet or a survey, Qualtrics, something along those lines to collect the data. At least the ones that we've talked to, or physical forms like the actual paper forms.
Okay. And as staff, do you feel like option 3 would help us meet the requirements of the law currently while we work on figuring out a long-term solution or getting that in UTREX?
I think that would meet the requirements of the law for sure and keep us in compliance.
Member Lear?
Sorry, nothing like dashing out and coming right back to the last of the discussion. But one of the things I've always struggled with these data is that it's not something LEAs want to report. And so I feel like sometimes the data we get are not, they're not reliable, at least to my mind. So I'm looking at these options quickly and I'm thinking we probably would get better data from option 2. If they can input aggregate level data, it's still not going to look good probably, but at least it won't be, it won't look as damning as, and I know that sounds like we're we're kind of enabling them to not give us everything we want, but realistically, this has always been a problem. We're asking for something that is very much against their interest. So I don't know, do you have a thought about that, or a way that we can get the best data possible realistically? Not just, well, we'll do this and then we'll yell at them if they don't give us their every incident, or we'll go in and audit them and say, you didn't give us this, you didn't give us that. So, I mean, realistically, is there something we can do that has us working as partners and not, hi, Aaron, I knew you would have an answer. Anyway. Yeah.
Go ahead, Aaron.
Aaron Bruff, Director of Data and Statistics. These are hard questions.
No, it's one of those wicked problems.
It is
not easily solved.
So I don't like any of these. I like option one, by the way, but I don't count. I'm just letting you know. It's like
You do count. You might not have the last vote, but you can.
Let me just go back to why do I like option one is we find, and I'm not trying to derail anything, it's just we find ourselves constantly in, hey, the law is now in place, whatever law it is. And it's like, now report on it. Like, we have to get things in place. It takes time. Oh, we're out of compliance. It just know that with everything, when anytime data is requested, it takes a while. We're just saying that. So now going into this one and your question about data quality, there are a series of things that we do data quality wise, where we check, we review, we do audits on the back end of it. So as the data flows in, yes, there's always the problem of saying, do we trust this explicitly that they're being, they're giving us all records? The answer is we don't know until we can start applying data quality components so they're actually say, what's going on, trend wise, are you off? What's going on? We don't know. And so a lot of times those data quality components come in after the fact they come in there. So as we talk about that, option two is, again, these are, I want to say, temporary solutions. Option two says you gather it and report. And I haven't heard what the LEA said, so that was news to me, because I thought this would probably be the easier approach for them to just, because they have to maintain it anyway. But with that said, option three obviously works. It's a temporary solution. There is there's ways that we can pull the data and make sure that the LEAs review it at the end of the year, that they're satisfied with the information, they have it all. The way you set up the last one is if they've missed something, they can add it in later, because the last one doesn't aggregate until you say we're at the end and we close it. So that's kind of the difference between those two. Is one or two, you're relying upon the LEA to submit the information based upon what they've gathered, put it in. And again, we're talking the big LEAs who've got more staff to small charter schools who, directors wearing 15 hats. Oh yeah, I remember that. Again, you're doing population size. So obviously you'd expect less at the smaller schools. But with that said, option three does allow then for them to go back in and update things as we're going through, double check, because you just leave it open and it's not, does that make sense? It's not closed until we do a double check. If we do that process of doing the data quality checking and letting the LEA see the results at the end, which are all things that we can do. So just sharing again, these are temporary solutions. And by the way, as you know, UTREX is also going away. We're going to USIMS eventually. And so all these conversations are happening saying, okay, where do we build? Where do we put this out? How are we collecting it? So I hope that answers the question. Is they're all bad. Pick the best worst, if that helps.
That actually just has me have a lot more questions, because that's my concern is like, we don't want to have an LEA. We don't want to change this process every year for 3 years either, right? This is one of the frustrations of schools and districts is the more we change things, the less likely they are to do it and do it well, right? So I guess my question would be, by code, what what is our actual requirement as far as them reporting it to USBE, and when does that have to start? So the schools have to collect this information. What's the requirement for and code for it to be reported to USBE?
LEA first, so that.
Yes.
And report to the state board annually.
Yes, exactly.
Regarding. And that was that, and the starting date on this, that they have to report it annually, was that May 7th?
Correct.
So that is in effect currently.
Go back again, guys, let's see what's duration, purpose. Yeah, that's.
Can I offer just one more thing to consider with this is each school has to have an emergency safety intervention committee that reviews each of these. And that varies, you know, each school there's nothing that says it has to be immediately or monthly or quarterly, but they have to be reviewing those as they go along. So that's just something to consider as you're looking at when the data should be reported.
And so with that, can I ask, as far as when you talk about building this into UTREX, because then we may switch it to USIMS, what would that look like in UTREX? Because I also don't want us to spend time and money building something out in UTREX that's just going to switch over to something else, because then that's our staff time as well. Can you speak to that?
You bet. We're in an interesting transition period where there is, based upon rules, there's duplication of work. It has to be done. Certain things aren't ready yet, so you have to do it in UTREX, and then it's going to be transitioned over to USIMS. We make sure those communications happen. So just sharing that's just kind of the reality of where we're at right now in our modernization efforts. Is some things will be duplicated. This is an example.
So there's no way to prevent the duplication, basically.
We can go with number one and say we're not going to collect it until we're ready. But
well, I'm just wondering if there's like a form that they fill out at the end of that has their quarter, because they meet quarterly typically with their ESI committees, right? I've served on one before. And so I'm just wondering if there's maybe even just
that would be option 3. Like when they meet, then input the information.
What about the other, and maybe this is partly you, Aaron, too. Have we ever resolved the concern that an incident, if you can go back to that language, Elise, that you had, an incident shall be reported regarding an incident. Have we ever resolved if a fight of 6 is 1 incident or 6 incidents?
Yes, we've resolved it. Depends on how you want to count it.
Well,
so on the report that we put up on our website where we go over the incident, right? It's divided into multiple approaches. So if for example, a fight is 1 incident, and then you have associated incident with it, or an associated record, which says it involved 5 or 6 people, whatever. So we have both, and we can count them both.
Okay,
and so
kind of have
we have that in place. When an incident happens, and if it has multiple individuals associated with that, we can count those as well. So it depends on, again, the question as it's brought up, and as we do the analysis behind it, we report out both ways. This happened so many times. This happened to so many people. And it's different, and sometimes it's fun when you're reading, there's some nuances in the report saying, what are we talking about here? But yes, we can separate those out.
And our LEA is pretty good about reporting. I know this is maybe brand new, but I know there's been this required reporting for decades. Our LEA is pretty good about providing all the related information so you can discern.
When you say all the related information,
like what we just discussed. I mean, is this?
This adds some additional, this one adds a lot of additional components to it.
Right.
Are the LEAs always good?
Compliant.
They're wonderful.
Compliant. We know they are. Compliant.
Yes, they get there. There's a lot of training, and this is just clear. There's a lot of training that has happened on multiple facets or, fronts where, we talk with the technical, the data collecting team. We go to the specialists, the counterparts of I don't know what your counterparts are called, but, there's lots of training that goes out, and we make sure that we're making those interfaces and having that connection happen. So
Let me just make this a yes or no question. Do you feel like the LEAs have improved in terms of their reporting of this information?
yes, and when we say this information,
The stuff under 11,
yes,
parentheses 11.
yes.
Thank you.
Well, when we say yes,
I
some is new.
It's not perfect.
Yeah.
Not
But they're doing, I'll just follow up. Our instant reporting accuracy has been going up year after year after year, and we're getting much, much better.
So looking at this list of data that's required and just trying to think about these options that we have going through a Qualtrics survey, for each incident, you could have a piece in a Qualtrics survey that addresses all of those. But if we're having them address it or report it annually, how would we report B3? If it's supposed to be for each incident, what would that look like in a Qualtrics survey?
That's been a question we've been talking about too, is what would that look like at an aggregate level? And would it be just, adding all the alternate interventions that were used? And we've had a question about that language specifically, because there could be multiple alternative interventions for each incident specifically. So we've kind of talked about, is there, do they just say these are the common ones that we used, or these are every single one that we used, and maybe, the same alternative intervention was used for multiple incidents, so they just list it once. But we've kind of, this is an ongoing conversation that we've talked about, how would that be done at an aggregate level? It would be a little bit more difficult, but we can work through and problem solve what might be the best route to go with that.
Right, especially if it says they have to report to the state board for each incident. That's the tricky part. Okay, can you go back to the 3 suggestions? I'm wondering, or just thinking out loud maybe, and love the opinion of other committee members. If we go with option 1, but then add a caveat that maybe we work with the maker of the bill because this obviously didn't get reported for the 24-25 school year. It would be reported for the 25-26 school year, yet we have another session of legislation coming up. I'm wondering if maybe we can work with her to change the date of the beginning, or the date of when it needs to be reported, right? Because that kind of meets our requirement where it kind of maybe buys us time where it needs to be reported to the state board beginning in the 26-27 school year. So it allows us to do the training, allows us to make sure, like schools right now obviously have to start working on collecting this data for each incident. But then I'm wondering if that would kind of buy us time to build out our system, but then help us stay in compliance with the law. So just thoughts on that. Committee members, thoughts on? Member Lair?
I think that's an excellent idea if we feel like that's not dodging the sponsor's desire.
Right. And I think that if we're meeting in July with her and she's against it, that gives us time to address it between now and before it goes to the board in August, if we do need to pivot from that.
Agreed.
Member Hall, did you?
I'm on board with that.
Okay. All right. So we need to make an official motion, or do we just direct? What do we need to do here, Elise?
We can be safe and make a motion. I can type that up.
Okay, you'll help me cue it up.
Let me-
Oh, okay. Member Carey, we hear that you are back online. I'm not sure how much of that discussion that you heard, but do you have any comments or questions to this discussion? Oh, let me say that again. Okay, Member Carey, we hear you are back online. Can you hear us? Maybe not. We'll see if he's going to vote.
Okay, where are we supposed to put it?
She's just queuing it up for us.
How does that look?
Sponsor. Yeah, a little clunky.
Well,
you go back to the three options. I'm just wondering if we need to have. Because regardless, we're expecting LEAs to collect this data. That's already happening, or that's already going to be a requirement. We're already working on training. Those pieces are already happening. It's just the part we're trying to address here is how do we collect the data, the reporting from the LEAs.
Yeah, we would, in that amendment, if I can make a suggestion, it's a data reporting requirement versus the data collection requirement.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and make a motion that the committee directs staff to meet with the sponsor of SB 170 to discuss possibilities of legislation to delay the implementation date of the data reporting requirement. Any comments to that motion?
I just want to make sure it also might give us the opportunity to discuss some of the contradictions that might be, or
and discuss what an intervention is.
And I'm just kidding. The complexities. There's some nice way of saying and clarify the language. I mean, is that implicit in this?
If I may, we have one additional policy question for you. So maybe we want to wait on this motion and include all of the topics.
Okay, let's do it.
Sorry.
Yeah, we'll just make it a big.
Vice Chair, if I may.
Yes,
Board
please.
member carries online. He just can't hear what we're saying.
Sounds like
she can't hear us.
Oh, he just said he can hear now.
Okay. All right. So for Chair Carey, just so we'll just kind of catch you up. We're talking about the emergency safety intervention amendments, and we're discussing potentially working with the sponsor of SB 170 to clarify some language, and staff has some considerations that they've shared with us. So we're going to go to consideration number 2, and then we'll check in with you.
Awesome. Thank you, Chair. And this one maybe hopefully is much simpler. We just wanted to make sure that you were all super clear on how we were interpreting the bill. So another part of the bill requires us to make rules, and this is the list of the things that we needed to make rules about. We feel pretty good about all of them. However, number 6 is to establish investigation protocols. And it is not clear in the bill what it is that we would be investigating or who would be investigating. And so we interpreted this that we have several different investigative processes in our agency that already cover a lot of the different elements that would be included in an ESI investigation. So the very last line of the rule that we wrote said that violations of law and this board rule will be handled through the appropriate process, emphasis on appropriate process, as outlined in 114, 123, 211, Utah special education rules, that are incorporated in 750. And so here's a little chart that kind of outlines what different aspects of an ESI issue would be covered by these different processes outlined in rules. So first is 114, that's general compliance with law. Because we are bumping this rule up to a category 3, this could now follow the process where it would be formal compliance through the superintendent and through the board. 1, 2, 3 is for hotline complaints. So if we receive something about an inappropriate use of ESI through the hotline, that goes through audit and goes through their process. If it is a teacher allegation, if a teacher has violated board rule or law or ethics, that would go through UPAC through 211. And then 750, if the student involved has an IEP, then special education can investigate for certain elements that would have been violated. Those include like notice, or if it violates the student's IEP, things like that. So this is how we are interpreting it and feel like this is sufficient to cover that. But just wanted to make sure, really sure that you as the policymakers are comfortable with that. And if you would like us to do anything further.
Hey, thank you. And I'm trying to find, so is that on this current draft that you're making that recommendation on?
Can we go back to that is the language in the bill, or no, where's the language in the bill again, Elise? Protocols.
Member Lear, did you have a comment on your microphone?
That was so tactful. I am just it so galls me to say this, and I'm hoping Joe can hear. I think this suggests that more than suggests. I think the bill says that the board has to establish investigation protocols, and that's where I've always been frustrated or backed down. I wanted to say LEAs have a policy and establish as investigation, and it has to include an investigation process. And I've been really reluctant to say, and here's what your investigation has to look like. But I think, and Elise, you guys correct me if I think it says we need to put some steps out there for LEAs, which is kind of a roundabout way of saying I don't think that what you're proposing quite meets that. You think that's, as much as I don't like it, I think that's what it says.
We went back and forth. We've had lots of discussions. We plan to have lots more discussions about this. So we are comfortable with taking whatever direction you as the policymakers choose.
But here's a thought. Is that okay? Can I?
Please, Member Lear.
Here's the next thing. We have so much time. This is just the worst possibility situation for me. Here's a thought. We could maybe to satisfy, and that probably, if we looked more closely, I'm sure that's just an illustration of the numbers of investigations. There's probably another 5 of those, probably. In terms of your examples of we have these kinds of investigations, right?
And the code specifically calls out DCFS and law enforcement as well. We didn't include this in that chart since it doesn't fall under USBE, but those are supposed to be called in if there are significant violations of the use of ESI. So there are those as well.
So you've got employment investigations. You've got, I could do 5 more off the top of my head.
Yep.
What I was wondering if we could do, and I don't know where the best place to do it, so I'll just throw the idea out there, and this would be helpful for the AAGs to be involved too, is say an investigation must include, shall include at least the following elements. And I think if we did that, then I think that would satisfy, without expressly telling LEAs what each investigative process has to look like. I think that would satisfy the language in the law. That's my thinking, but you tell me if you think differently, and if Ashley wants to weigh in if she's online. Yo, Ashley.
Ashley, are you online?
I thought I heard a blip. Maybe not. Never mind. Maybe she's not. Anyway, that's what do you think about? What do you think, Rod? What do you think, Amanda?
Member Hall?
So they would still go through the processes that she laid out there. This is just the language that would be used.
That
depending on what it was, right?
Well, I was hoping to use language like that so that we didn't have to go to every rule that included an investigation.
Okay.
And say, because they will vary a little bit, but if we said, I'm just going to throw out just a very brief example. So it said every investigation shall include talking to the complainant and talking to the respondent and looking for offering the opportunity for witnesses to respond and providing a written summary of the comments or the witness statements and having written findings and having an appeal process.
Looks like you just laid it out for us.
Yeah.
Well, it's not like I haven't done it for 44 years, but so I mean, I think it could be that, and then that could be individualized by LEAs for each of those, but they would know that it had to have at least those elements. And I think that would satisfy the word protocols.
Okay.
That's just a suggestion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense.
And then we wouldn't have to go in and say, your employment investigations have to look like this, and your special ed investigations have to look like this, and your
But we would still have to find the wording for what those were.
right, but with those elements, that's where I think the AGs could be helpful.
Okay.
Because there are some basic, and Laura Lee's stepping up because she's got.
Looks like
she's
we
an
have
attorney.
another idea.
She's an attorney too, yeah. One more attorney opinion. What do you think?
Yeah, Laura Lee.
And I know you have never mind, go ahead.
That's okay, Carol. You can say it. I just
Sorry, I'm going to pause you for a second. Will you introduce yourself,
yes,
please?
I will. I am Laura Lee Gillespie, Special Education Program Support Coordinator. I would
And
just
also an attorney, so that's not your role there, but
yeah. I will say that in terms of special education, it has to go a certain way, and so. Granted, this is a different thing, but if it is related to the student's IEP, then they would have to go through state complaint and due process procedures under special education. That's even true with our hotline. They come in and they have to go through that process if it's related to that. That doesn't mean they can't bring a complaint through the process that you just said that's solely and specific to a restraint or seclusion. But when that IEP starts to get connected to it, then it's already in place. That's where they need to go.
Violating all the laws.
And what I'm asking though, what I'm saying is, even with special ed, if our elements were sort of general enough.
Yes.
You could say, because you would talk to, in every special ed investigation, you talk to the complainant, you talk to the respondent,
what
look
you
for
outlined is
witnesses.
exactly what's involved.
So that would, in a general, I mean, I'm looking for general enough steps that it would work with any of these investigations. And so it would
absolutely.
also be
Yes.
okay for special ed. Okay. Yeah, I just didn't want you to say no, it would, because I know it has to be explicitly what IDEA requires, but the general due process elements could still be okay.
So you're saying it's going to be broad enough so we don't have to have a separate process that can be included, but it just outlines
That's what
the common elements. I don't want to have them have to go through several processes.
No, I don't, and I don't want them just to, what you said.
Yeah, it looks like, yep, CAE Davis.
Sorry, this is CAE Davis. I was down in my office listening and I'm like, oh, investigations, my ears perked up. But
her audit heart started.
I know. You know me well. But House Bill 497 that just passed this last legislative session also includes a requirement for the board to make rules to create guidelines or provide information about reviewing and investigating compliance issues. So I just wonder if there's a broader conversation that needs to happen across the board, like any investigation, as you're talking about, but just recognizing, there's House Bill 497 and there's this one and so there's investigation requirements that are popping up in a lot of different places. So just something to consider. A broader conversation.
Right. Can I
thank you.
To that though, Debbie, if even tonight, I don't remember the exact language in 497, but if the board was willing to lay out steps, and I don't know if 5 is enough or 7's too many or whatever, that could also satisfy that requirement, could it not? If they're general due process elements.
Yeah, and through the chair, I would say yes, I think so. I will say R277-613 has quite an extensive list of things that have to happen with an investigation. So it could just be plugging into some of what happens there and taking it and going. So there are things out there, but it almost seems like, are we going the direction of if they want how to investigate in a lot of different ways, or there's best practice manuals. I know we're aware of them I might not want to plug into those, but simple steps is fine too.
Simple. I just rather keep it simple and not have 10 steps. And then here's 10 steps for UPAC. And here's 10 steps for special ed. And here's that we would just say that includes these elements or some other word. And we'd put it in some general rule that then satisfies the requirements of this.
I wanted to check in. Is AAG Bill online? Okay, if she's back, Ashley, if you can help us understand this a little bit better, what the requirements would be.
Yeah, sorry, I stepped out for a minute. So can you just give me the kind of background on that?
Yes, so if we can go, can you pull up the recommended language from your presentation first? So we're having a discussion about the new requirement here in law for SB 170 that says establish investigation protocols that's required for that. And so the recommendation, now if you go to the language that you had in the rule, the recommendation was to just add in the words appropriate process as outlined by some of our other rules. So the question is, would this satisfy that code, or do we need to outline a more specific process, maybe that says includes these steps?
I think that should satisfy the requirement under the law as long as, you know, the process is within those rules. Unless they're, you know, I think you could do it the other way. You could say like the steps as followed in, it might be helpful to include subsections of those rules so that you have a more direct place that you're pointing to. Or to make sure that they're like in the right order of the process that you would follow. But I think the way it is would probably still be in compliance with the statute.
Okay. Member Lurch, did you
Yeah,
have a follow-up?
Ashley, and I probably said it better last time, so I'm sorry you missed it. But what I was suggesting, I was thinking because the law requires investigation protocols, rather than try to catch every rule that, or every thing that is maybe not even a rule, like IDEA, I was wondering if we could in some rule identify some basic elements of investigation protocols and then let LEAs have their own procedures, but that saying that your investigations have to include these 10 elements or 6 elements or something. Is that less efficient, more efficient, also satisfactory? I just worry that if we list these appropriate processes outlined, we could miss different rules or situations where an investigation might be required.
Yeah, I think that's also a satisfactory option. And I think that does leave, like you said, some room for local control or local elements as well, as long as they're meeting, you know, the 6 or 10, whatever framework pieces that we're saying are mandatory.
I just wanted to see if you thought that addressed it. I worry if we list out these that we're going to miss some.
Sure.
So I'm wondering if we go back to the motion document. I mean, we could make that and continue that as a motion if you want to do that separately, or we could also have staff working with the sponsor of SB 170 to see if the original language would meet the requirement before. I just think the simpler the better if we can, but I understand what you're saying as far as clarifying.
I'm just fine to throw that idea out there and say, you guys present to us what you think is best. Is that okay? I just want you to work with the AAGs so that and I do kind of resist requiring every rule to have an outlined investigative protocol. That's what because they'll be different from rule to rule, and then the LEAs will say, well, we're using the one from 613, and somebody's saying, well, you really need there's a different one outlined in one of the audit rules, 114 or 113 or so. I just looking for a way to say, here's some basic steps, and then make sure all of your investigations include these basic components.
And
Does that am I crazy or no? Or looks like Joe's got some ideas too.
Chair Carey?
Yeah, I'm not opposed to that, but I do think that for data to mean anything, you have to be able to aggregate it. And if our policies are not specific enough, the LEA data the processes they put in place, neither USBE nor the state could aggregate that data to derive the most benefit from it. So I agree that there's a middle ground that I don't want to micromanage, but it's my understanding the state wants these policies in place so that they have a repository that they can go to say, hey, give us the information on XYZ. If all the data streams we have coming in, there's no similarities, that makes that either impossible or extremely difficult, which means we're having the LEEs do work that has zero benefit. So if the motion is to direct staff to come up with that initial process and present it back to us, I'm all for that. If the motion is to say, come up with that list and then let's send it on to the full board, I would be opposed to that.
And Chair Carey, are you talking specifically to the emergency safety intervention data or to the investigation protocols?
This would be the investigation protocols.
Okay, so you would prefer staff to recommend an outline like Member Lear had originally suggested?
No, Member Lear is, I want more meat on the bones. I would like to see much more defined intake processes for all LEAs. It's kind of like what we did with 123. There has to be a central point where this information is coming through so it can be uniformly tracked and measured. I don't think we're there yet with this language. And that's why I'm saying, yeah, let's let staff take a go at it. And I think that during that process, either we can give individual feedback, we can meet with them as a committee. But I think this is one we really have to get right. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Carey. Okay, so Chair Carey, I'm going to direct a question to you. Would you, because we have talked about how we would like to get a little bit more information from the sponsor and work on this. Obviously, it needs more work before we go to the full board. Would you feel comfortable when we talk about getting more information from the sponsor and the specific data that needs to be collected for those investigations and protocols, and then have us work on it with staff before going to the full board?
I would, and I would also add to that, if I understood correctly, it sounded like our chief audit executive was not fully apprised that this matter was coming before the committee. And again, I don't know if I heard that correctly, or maybe I misunderstood it, but I would also ask that our chief audit executive, who I know is familiar with the best practices surrounding these procedures, that she be included in these matters moving forward.
Okay, thank you. So Debbie, it sounds like we're going to invite you to the party. Okay. All right. Okay, so committee, we do have, we've kind of changed this motion a little bit. Are there any, before I read it out, are there any amendments to this or things that we would want to adjust or change, or does this really encompass the message that we want to have moving forward?
I think that's your best.
Member Hall?
Is there anything in the motion about it coming back before the committee in July?
And then bring the information back.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so adding maybe that the committee directs staff to meet with the sponsor of SB 170 to discuss, and then at least maybe we can add some language to bring back to the committee for discussion in July, in the July committee meeting?
Just so that I am clear, Chair, we may not be able to meet with the sponsor before the July meeting. We're unsure of the date exactly, but we're fine to work on this as staff and then bring what we work on to this committee during the July meeting. We'd be totally fine with that. And then as long as that satisfies.
There won't be a July board meeting.
Or July committee meeting.
No.
So what you're saying is that you may not be able to meet with the sponsor before a July committee meeting because we don't know when that is.
Yes.
And we don't know when we're meeting with the sponsor.
Yes.
So we want to make it maybe more general that we,
I'd like to know those sheets, but the sponsor expects.
yeah, I do think that
What
this,
you guys recommend.
well, maybe we just say to discuss and bring back to the committee.
Because if you don't mind, Chair,
Yes.
is the meeting, can you set that up? Is it based on the time that the sponsor's available? And then maybe when you guys find that out, we can probably mobilize to do it. We need to do a meet towards the end of July if it's necessary.
Yeah.
So we can accommodate that.
So if we just, member Hall, would it suffice you if we just say to bring back to the committee? And then that way that gives us flexibility on when we meet, because then maybe it's a separate meeting than our committee meeting.
Right.
Chair Carey, was there anything else that you wanted to address?
No, thank you, Vice Chair.
Okay. So the motion on the board is that the committee directs staff to meet with the sponsor of SB 170 to discuss the following topics and bring the information back to the committee. 1, possibilities of legislation to delay the implementation date of the data reporting requirement. 2, review the application of the requirement to write rules outlining investigation protocols. And 3, explore other options for the use of the word intervention. Any other comments before we vote?
Just on number 2, review the requirement.
Member Lear?
Review the requirement to delay the or review the requirement to write rules outlining the investigation process. It's okay? Yeah. Okay. That's just, yes.
This is why we read it, so we can make sure we get it right. Perfect. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and read it again. The motion is that the committee directs staff to meet with the sponsor of SB 170 to discuss the following topics and bring the information back to the committee. 1, possibilities of legislation to delay the implementation date of the data reporting requirement. 2, review the requirement to write rules outlining investigation protocols. And 3, explore other options for the use of the word intervention. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And Chair Carey?
Yes.
Okay, that motion passes unanimously. Okay. Is there anything else that we need to address with that, Deputy Superintendent? Oh, pass the rule. Okay, so we're going to go back to the rule. And knowing that this rule may be, if we pass this draft of the rule, this may be changed before we take it to the full board in August. So just want to make sure that that's clear with our committee. Are there any other changes or amendments that the committee would like to make before we move draft 1?
Vice Chair, if I may.
Yes, Chair Carey.
In light of the fact that we are waiting on this additional information, unless there is something pressing that requires this rule to be passed, my recommendation or my thought, I should say, is why don't we just hold it until we get this additional information and then address this at one time? I know there's many people on the board, myself included, that increasingly reluctant to pass portions of rules or related material to a rule without it having been finalized.
Yes, thank you. And we did discuss that at the beginning of this rule discussion. We did talk about there, from my understanding, and please clarify, Deputy Superintendent Newey, that there may be a pressing issue with requirements, data reporting requirements that need to go through. Can staff speak to that?
Yeah, so there are the data reporting requirements as well as the policy requirements. I do, if you are having a special committee in July, that may be an option to approve it at that point, and then in August at the full board, it would go before the full board. But I do think that just because of the policy requirements and changes that may need to be made there, and then the data reporting requirements, some of those are a little bit more pressing.
So it's fair to say that if we address it in July with still hopes to send it to the full committee or the full board in August, that could still keep us potentially on track.
I think so.
And Chair Carey, does that meet your needs?
Absolutely.
Or desires,
and
I guess.
agree
Okay.
with that. Yeah, thank you.
Would you like to make a motion?
Sure. And that would be that along the lines of the committee. Oh, is there one being drafted?
I was going to say, it looks like they're drafting one up for you.
Thank you.
Okay.
So the motion would be the substitute motion that the committee postpone R277-608, emergency safety interventions and prohibition of corporal punishment, to the July committee meeting.
Okay, thank you. Any discussions or comments to that substitute motion? Okay, the motion is that the committee postpone R277-608, emergency safety interventions and prohibition of corporal punishment, to the July committee meeting. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, that passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, that moves us to item 1.13, R277-114. And this is just a discussion item, response to compliance and related issues. Chair Carey, did you want to speak to this?
Yeah. Thank you, Vice Chair. I just wanted to bring this forward, given the emphasis of the legislature on investigations and enforcement. I thought it would be a good time for us to re-examine 114. And so in tandem with that is 111, the framework issue. And my hope was that today we could be able to hear from staff and hear their recommendations in terms of what they feel is working in those rules and what they feel might be up for review and possible revision.
Okay, Deputy Superintendent Nui, do we have any thoughts on this?
Thank you, Chair. Gathering my thoughts. I would love to provide a more probably detailed account of our use of it. I can say anecdotally from my position within policy that I frequently use this language, both of 114 and 111, when I speak with legislators. I think that has been, in my experience from 2 years past to this last legislative session, it has been helpful to be really clear with legislators about, okay, if these are the data elements that you're requiring, just like we spoke about with 608, then these are the kinds of things that's going to require of us, right? An update to our UTREC system, potentially more staff or more monitoring. So being able to have really frank conversations with legislators with that on paper of the shared language has been really beneficial. As for specific changes, I think that there are changes that we could make. I would need some time to kind of dig into that. I know that we also have several other areas within the agency that use these 114 and 111 in different ways. I see we have Debbie Davis here, hopefully to speak to the way that audit uses it. I know like Land Trust, for example, has really leaned on 114 when it comes to compliance because there's a lot of monitoring and compliance issues that come with Land Trust just because of the detail-oriented data collection nature of that. And I know that they've leaned really heavily on that as well. But that's all I can personally speak to at this point. I could prepare more for another date, but yeah.
Okay, thank you. We're going to have CAE Davis speak to the discussion.
Okay, so Chief Audit Executive Debbie Davis, thanks for having me again. So internal audit has interacted, our interactions with the rule, so I'd say primarily it's the hotline. So someone calls in, they have a concern, and internal audit does a review or a high-level screening. And as part of that, we're kind of trying to identify, well, what's the criteria that would be associated with the alleged violation? Is it Utah code? Is it a board rule? Is it a local policy? And so in doing that, understanding, okay, how is the board categorizing this? Or maybe even more importantly, who at the State Board of Education would be responsible so that when we make a referral, we're getting people to the right place so they can get their question answered, their concern resolved. And that piece of it would be kind of regardless of categorization, just who's responsible. But prior to the 111, 114, the way it is currently, I would say that we didn't have as much visibility to, well, is this a state board thing? Is there anyone here in this agency that is kind of over this? So an example would be R277-107, which is category 1 or 2, I can't remember, but that's about if an educator, say a coach, maybe is doing a private camp in the summer, what does that look like? Are there parameters around that? And there are parameters in rule around that, but there's no one here at the State Board of Education that's really over that. And so what do we do with the hotline? Who would we refer it to? With the categorization, of course, we just say, well, it's going to the LEA. So there, again, there's more visibility to that. Whether that's the appropriate way that should be handled because there is a board rule, I guess that could be in question, right? It's like, well, if the board's not going to monitor this, should we have a rule with parameters? Or not. So those are a couple of things that have come up with 111 and 114. Of course, 114 also includes some provisions about, okay, if there's alleged noncompliance, and this is 114-3, and it talks about the superintendent could work informally, or board leadership could work informally, or if the audit committee has it and directs internal audit to do an investigation, there's some of those provisions, and that's new. And so we've done, I think, one of those each so far. So we're still learning about that process. I know there's been questions about what does informal look like? What should it look like? What documentation is associated with that? So there are some questions there. And then as some of the discussion yesterday was, does that part of the rule maybe conflict with other parts of the rule with corrective action? And also considerations of, because of that, what does open and public meetings look like? What does grandma classification look like? So there's definitely a lot of policy conversations to look at here. I will also say from a federal grants management standpoint, so the federal government is super tight on what does it look like to monitor and then resulting corrective action when you receive their funds and what you're supposed to do and eligibility. So, and I've said for years, they are light years, amazingly. The federal government is light years ahead of states, I would say, or at least this state, as far as what that monitoring looks like, what corrective action needs to look like. So there's maybe some questions as well. Hey, if we have to do this on the federal side, because we do have federal money, should it look the same at the state level? So there's one process for both, or does it look different? And then maybe one last consideration is, what is the data surrounding corrective action? What does it look like? How much of it's happening? Who's doing it? What are the processes? And does the board have visibility to that? Do you want visibility to that? And then if so, who's maintaining that? What does it look like? You've got both financial and program monitoring that's happening. You have corrective action in both cases. If there's consideration of if there's a question cost, if those are unallowable, if LEAs need to pay things back, if there's penalties. The legislature has been kind of expanding some of those remedy options that are available to the board. So that's data that could potentially be tracked with corrective action. That I don't think there's kind of one place where all of that comes together. So there's a few things, in my opinion, in this area. Hopefully that's helpful.
So can I follow up question? So is the framework helpful? And like what I heard you say is basically what I'm hearing you say is that to have clear expectations and guidelines and refer, like that's really would be helpful in making sure that we know what data needs to be collected and how to disaggregate it. I always tell teachers and administrators, clear is kind. And the more clear we can be in what is expected, the more likely it is to happen. Does the framework help at least provide like a foundation for that oversight? Yes. Yeah. And I guess I should say for the public, because we are kind of talking about, as Chair Carey said, these kind of go together. So we're kind of talking about one item 113 and 114, R277, 111 board oversight frameworks. They kind of go together. But can you speak to that? Is it helpful as a foundation? Does it just need to be clarified? What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. I mentioned visibility and maybe expectation. So what I think is helpful is we know kind of how the board is going to approach. Again, this rule is a category 1 or 2. If I know that, then what's the expectation? Whether it needs to be a category 1, 2, 3, 4, or if there's a different way to say, give the board's expectation or the availability of staff and resources to manage what's happening. I think there's different ways you could go there, but at least having a category, again, when I take a hotline call, I know I can say, well, it's a category 1 or 2. You could disagree with that, but at least you know what it means, right? So that part's kind, even if they're still frustrated, like, but I wanted the state to step in and resolve this because you do have a rule. And I will say that it's come up a couple times with legislative audit as well, where they say, but you have a rule. Why isn't the state involved? Right. So, but that goes back to policymaking. And again, at least we're being clear about what we're doing. So it is a policy direction, whether it's the best policy direction. You are all elected to make that decision, not me. But I do think it provides some expectation.
Okay, thank you. Right. Member Lear. Oh, sorry. We'll go to Chair Carey and then back to Member Lear.
Thank you. Just to follow up, Chief Audit Executive Davis, you said, it gives us a basis to say what we're doing. My take on it is just the opposite. It provides a convenient excuse to explain why we're not doing something. And I go back to this example because it was shocking. The category for pornography was a category 2. And I'm thinking to myself, who on staff and who on this board thinks that getting pornography out of our schools is a level 2? Because in my opinion, we should be using the full resources of the board.
Chair Carey, can you clarify which policy that was the level 2 that you're discussing? There's just a question on which one you're talking about.
It's the one that sensitive materials. When it was brought to the board's attention, when I brought it to the board's attention that it was a level 2, Board Member Wood made a motion to make it a category 4, which obviously passed. It was an election year. My point being, that example showed me that despite all the talk about science and data and how many employees and how much money and resources are we pouring into this rule or this area, because that, I was told, should be the reason whether it's a level 2 or a category 2 or a category 1 or 4. When I saw that happen, that we went from a level 2, category 2 to a category 4, I realized that no, this is like the Wizard of Oz. There is no science behind these categories. I learned from you, Chief Audit Executive Davis, I believe that Rule 123 is level 2, a category 2. How can this board classify, and I shouldn't say the board, I mean, staff proposes, we approve, but this was proposed as a category 2, and I'm thinking, wait a second. Isn't this one of our core functions to hear what's working and what's not working in public education? And when I go to ask for more money for more investigators so we can take in complaints more efficiently, I have both members of staff and the legislators saying, well, it's only a level 2. So I'm worried not that it's being used to help us determine what to do or how to do it. There may be some nominal benefit there. My bigger concern is that it gives us an excuse as an organization to walk away from some of our core responsibilities. So I do have one request, and I asked this a year ago. I asked, how much money did it cost us as an organization to develop this framework? Was it $1 million? Was it 2 million? Was it 500,000? I was told that that information would be provided to me. So I'm not sure who on staff could help me track that down, but I would be interested in knowing what the cost to build the framework was and what we're doing in terms of maintaining it. Because apparently it has all these data streams coming into it that help us determine what category these rules should be in. And I'm really interested in learning more about that process and the funding behind it. But those are my concerns that I just wanted to share. Thank you, Vice Chair.
Hey, thank you, Chair Carey. So it sounds like there's a couple things I heard. One is that there's sometimes questions on how things get categorized. And, but it does sound like there's been precedents in the past that if it comes to the board and the board feels like it's not the right category, we have the power to change that recommendation. But then the other thing I'm hearing is just understanding the cost of this and the maintenance. Do we have information on that? I'm going to direct that to Deputy Superintendent Newey.
Yeah, a little tricky because that was before my time. This was implemented before I took this position. I will say that the maintenance of it, we have those discussions in the same conversations that we do in updating rules. So every time that we bring a rule to you, we talk with staff about the oversight category. So in that case, the only maintenance cost would just be in time to update rules. I can share, this doesn't go to cost, this goes to the how, the kind of document that we use internally when we're talking about the category and how we determine that. This is just the guidance document that when we present to staff, how to make that choice, we use this document. I can look into the records that I have available to me to see if anyone had done that cost estimate prior to my coming in. I can do that for sure. I don't have that right now.
Vice Chair, can I ask a question?
Yeah, Mr. Hall.
So does the framework or the category, does that determine how much money we can and resources that we can dedicate to whatever the issue might, whatever rule? So say there's a violation of 1, 2, 3. Does the category, it's a level 2, does that determine how much we can devote to whatever particular issue that is? Is that what those categories determine in the framework?
So it's kind of the other way around. So for example, land trust, for example, I brought that up. That's a category for, we have a 3-person team solely dedicated to that program. We have a person who is, their 100% job is compliance for the land trust program. So in that case, there is resources of time, personnel, money, right, that can oversee down to the penny how that money is being used. Then there's other things, for example, I would say like gang prevention, where we have one specialist who's over 5 different programs that includes the gang prevention, right? And gang prevention, super important, but just for the amount of time that we have in resources at the agency, it's 1/5 of a specialist time.
So what level would that be?
I would imagine that is a 2, but I
Maybe
would have to look and
A
see.
2, you think? That's
Yeah, because we take into account resources just one part of it, right? Because
Okay.
then there's also the monitoring systems, right? Is this something that we're getting constant information? Like, for example, with 608, it was a 2, but now that we're going to be getting annual information from LEAs, we're able to do much more deeper dive into that, regardless of the amount of staff that we have, right? It's just the amount of information we're being given from schools. So that's the second part of it. And then also third, what is the recourse? That's the third piece that we look at. So if it's, that the program is just about filling out forms and they're not receiving any money, then the recourse is fix the form, right? But if they're having to pay back money, then that's kind of a more serious conversation, right?
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I mean, it is fascinating because we do, as the USBE, we are asked to have general supervision and control over education. However, there are parts and pieces that we do have more control or more power over than others. But I also understand what Member Carey is saying. We don't want to just pass the buck and just be like, not our problem because of a category. But we definitely need to figure out a way that we can make sure all the concerns are addressed, but also be clear within the agency of what's your responsibility? Because I think everybody in this agency wants to fulfill their responsibility and their duties to the public education system. CAE Davis, you have another comment? Oh, sorry. Oh, I apologize. Yep, Member Lear was in the queue. My bad.
I'm sorry. I feel like, Member Carey, that we need a more comprehensive discussion about the oversight categories rule. And I don't know if I was around when that was developed. And to me, the cost of it's going to be a little hard to pin down. But I know we hired a part-time person to help to primarily be responsible for developing it. So it seems to me it would be the cost of that full-time or part-time employee to develop it, and then some percentage of Angie Stallings' time, who Elise Newey replaced. And so we could get a cost estimate for that is not going to be perfect, but I think that's a fair question. But my bigger concern or my bigger point is, I would, instead of like pecking this to death like a chicken, I would rather have a more comprehensive discussion about its value. We've heard from CAE Davis. She's a more process-driven person. We have other more policy-driven people. We have, so I think it would be helpful, rather, like I said, than just attacking this sort of through a committee rule change, or is to talk about holistically, does the board feel like it's been valuable? That includes a number of other staff members who work with these categories. I think the policy team that works on legislation was one of the strongest persuaders for me to say it's really helpful to use with legislators to say, yes, you raise these issues, but here's how many staff people and resources we have right now to devote to this monitoring concern. So it's kind of a chicken and an egg thing. I'm sure they would say, well, show us you could do X, Y, and Z if we gave you more money. And we're saying we can't even show you unless we have more money or staff. So I would just like more of a holistic discussion. I recall, Chair Carey, that you've never liked this, no blame intended, but I know you've never liked this oversight rule and program, but I would like to have now would be a good time to have a discussion. It's been in place for a year. Where are we now? And I also don't want to throw it out too quickly to say, maybe we should give it a chance over the course of another year. And Amanda's looking at her phone or a watch, not her phone, and saying,
we have a little time still.
Move this
We're
along,
good. We're
Carol.
still.
But I did want to, Member Carey took a while. I want to say, I think this is worthy of a bigger discussion with more people involved, with different perspectives. And I personally, maybe it includes the discussion of how much oversight is general oversight as the Constitution decrees. Because I personally don't agree with the comment that it's our responsibility to oversee in the same level of scrutiny that member Carey apparently feels like we should oversee. So even that, I think, is worthy of a bigger board discussion. I don't know how to facilitate that. I don't know where, but I just think it should take place with more individuals and not necessarily a committee discussion to undo this without understanding how a staff of 150 feel like it's worked for a year.
Member Hall.
Sheriff, if you don't mind. But I think it's important to understand too, along with Board Member Carey, what he was saying. I don't think it's just, him that talks about the oversight. It's the general public. What do they feel like oversight is? What do our legislators feel like oversight is? This is important. So I do think we need to explore and talk about this in greater detail.
With more stakeholders.
Yes.
Okay. Chair Carey, did you have any follow-up to that discussion or to the comments being made?
I am biting my tongue, not in a bad way, but just I do want to respond. I will just say that it is hard to unsee what I saw take place with pornography and the oversight category. And it convinced me that it is not the science that it is presented to be. And yeah, I do think it limits the power of the board bureaucratically. But I always think talking and listening are good things. So certainly willing to do that, but we'll be moving forward to either repeal or amend this rule. But obviously, feedback and communication is a good thing. So thank you, Vice Chair.
Okay. All right. These items, 1.13, 1.14 have just been information discussion items. Are there any other discussions or motions that anybody would like to make on these items?
I would just make the comment that, having this discussion doesn't prohibit us moving forward to appeal these. So I just think that can be all part of the process, right, as we move forward. So
right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Right. And I will say, just coming from just a professional education experience, anytime we start something new, any kind of a new program, any kind of a new procedure, it does take time to refine. We never have it perfect the first time. And to say E. Davis's point is sometimes we do have to clarify. And I think that Chair Carey is exactly right. Like a category 2 for pornography, that should not have ever been, right? And so we don't ever get it perfect. We definitely want to make sure that it is helping us do our work. And that's really what I would ask is this helping us do our work? Is it helping us clarify roles and responsibilities? I definitely don't want it to prohibit us from doing things that are our work. But again, to Member Hall's point, I think that there's just different perspectives on what general oversight. And I think that Member Lear already kind of mentioned that as well. So I think getting clear on that has to be part of this discussion. So, okay. With that, I will seek one final
Move that we
motion.
adjourn.
All right.
Did I cut you off?
Nope, you're good. Motion to adjourn. All those in favor? Aye. Okay. Member Carey?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. That is unanimous. We are adjourned.